The winter of 1876 was the kind that old-timers would later describe as the winter that stole souls. Snow fell not in gentle blankets, but in driving sheets that cut visibility to arm's length. The wind howled through the Rocky Mountain foothills, like a wounded animal, finding every gap in clothing, every crack in shelter. It was the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals and made fingers ache before they went numb. This merciless season showed no compassion for the weak, the unprepared or the abandoned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And abandoned they were. 3 children huddled beneath a lean-to of pine branches, their faces hollow with hunger, their eyes glazed with the particular emptiness that comes when hope begins to fade. 12-year-old Samuel Hayes clutched his younger siblings to his chest, as if his thin frame could somehow shield them from the brutal elements that had already claimed their parents. 9-year-old Emma, her once bright eyes now dull with exhaustion, methodically rubbed her little brother's hands between her own, and 6-year-old Timothy, too young to fully comprehend their dire circumstances, drifted between fitful sleep and quiet whimpers. The last ember of their small fire flickered and died, surrendering to the relentless wind. Samuel watched it fade, his jaw clenched against the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. They wouldn't survive another night like this. He knew it with the same certainty that he knew the sun would rise tomorrow, if they lived to see it. What Samuel couldn't know was that eyes were watching from the darkness beyond their meager shelter. Eyes that belonged to a people who understood survival in this unforgiving wilderness better than anyone. Eyes that saw not just 3 white children abandoned to the winter's mercy, but souls hanging in the balance between 2 worlds. And in that moment, with the wind keening through the trees and death lurking in the shadows, a decision was made that would forever alter the course of 3 young lives. The sickness came swiftly and without mercy to the Hayes family. What began as a persistent cough in their father quickly transformed into a ravaging fever that left both parents bedridden in their small cabin at the edge of Pinewood Creek. Samuel remembered the panic in his mother's eyes when she realized she was too weak to rise from her bed. "Take care of your brother and sister," she had whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. Those were the last coherent words she spoke. Within days, Thomas and Mary Hayes were gone, their bodies stiff and cold in the cabin that had once been filled with his mother's singing and his father's hearty laughter. Now there was only silence, punctuated by Emma's quiet sobs and Timmy's confused questions about when Mama would wake up. Samuel had done what any 12-year-old boy might do. He went for help. Trudging through the early winter snow to Pinewood Creek, he'd found Sheriff Wilson at his desk, boots propped up, nursing a mug of something that smelled sharp and medicinal. "Parents both dead, you say?" The sheriff had frowned, setting down his mug. "That's mighty unfortunate, son. Pastor Miller handles orphan situations, but he's overseeing 3 families already hit by the fever." Samuel stood straighter, trying to appear older than his 12 years. "We don't need charity, sir, just some help with..." His voice faltered. With what? Burying their parents? Finding food? Understanding how 3 children could possibly survive alone? The sheriff sighed, a sound heavy with reluctance. "I'll send someone out tomorrow to check on you and your siblings. Maybe Pastor Miller can find room somewhere." But tomorrow came with the first real blizzard of the season, and no one from town appeared at their cabin door. Samuel and Emma wrapped their parents in blankets and dragged them to the root cellar, the ground outside, too frozen for proper graves. Timmy watched from the window, his small face solemn and confused. "Are Mama and Papa in heaven now?" he asked when they returned, snow melting from their clothes. Emma pulled him close. "Yes, Timmy, they're in heaven watching over us." Samuel said nothing. Heaven seemed very far away from their cold cabin with its dwindling supplies. For 3 days, they survived on the last of their mother's preserved peaches and a half sack of flour. Samuel attempted to hunt with his father's rifle, but returned empty-handed each time, the game driven into deep cover by the worsening weather. When the flour ran out, he made a decision. "We're going to town," he announced, helping Timmy into an extra pair of socks. "We'll talk to Pastor Miller ourselves." Emma looked up from where she was carefully packing their mother's Bible into a small sack. "What if they separate us? Mrs. Turner told Mama once that orphans get sent to different homes." Samuel shook his head firmly. "We're staying together, no matter what." The journey to Pinewood Creek normally took 40 minutes on foot. In knee-deep snow with a 6-year-old whose energy flagged quickly, it took nearly 3 hours. By the time they reached the church, Timmy was crying from exhaustion, and Emma's lips had taken on a bluish tinge that worried Samuel deeply. Pastor Miller's face fell when he saw them at his door. "Oh, children," he said, ushering them inside where a small stove radiated precious warmth. "Sheriff Wilson told me about your parents. I've been trying to arrange something, but with the fever taking so many this winter." "We need food, sir," Samuel said bluntly, "and a warm place to stay." The pastor's gaze slid away. "The church is housing the Wilkerson family already. There's simply no room." He hesitated. "There's talk of an orphan train coming through Colorado City in spring. Until then—" "Orphan train?" Emma's voice was small. "What's that?" "It takes children east to new families," Pastor Miller explained gently. "Good Christian homes in places with milder winters and more opportunity." Samuel felt his sister stiffen beside him. "We're not being sent away from each other," he said. "With all the authority a 12-year-old could muster," the pastor sighed. "For now, I can offer you a meal and some supplies to take back to your cabin. It's the best I can do." They ate stew and cornbread in the church anteroom, the first hot meal they'd had since their parents fell ill. Pastor Miller's wife gave them a sack containing beans, salt pork, and a precious half-pound of coffee. "For trading," she explained, "if you need something we couldn't provide." As they prepared to leave, the pastor pressed a few coins into Samuel's hand. "Try Mr. Garrett's store. Tell him I sent you." The snow was falling again as they made their way to Garrett's general store. Inside, the shopkeeper eyed them with undisguised suspicion when Samuel placed their small bounty of coins on the counter. "Looking for candy, are you?" Mr. Garrett asked, making no move toward the barrels of flour or beans that lined the wall behind him. "No, sir. We need food. Our parents died of the fever, and we're at the cabin alone." Something flickered across the shopkeeper's face. Pity, perhaps, or discomfort. "Those coins won't buy much these days. Supplies are scarce with the pass snowed in." "Pastor Miller said to tell you he sent us," Emma added hopefully. Mr. Garrett snorted. "The pastor sends everyone my way expecting Christian charity, but I've got my own family to feed." His eyes narrowed. "Where are you staying? Someone taking you in?" Samuel hesitated, sensing danger in the question. "We're managing at our cabin." "3 children alone?" The shopkeeper shook his head. "That won't do. Sheriff should place you properly." He reached for a ledger beneath the counter. "I'll make a note for him. In the meantime." He took their coins and in return provided a small sack of cornmeal and a tin of molasses. "This is all I can spare. The sheriff will sort things out." Outside the store, Samuel stood motionless, watching, his breath cloud in the frigid air. The sheriff would sort things out, meaning separate them, send them to different homes or worse, to that orphan train the pastor mentioned. "Sam," Emma tugged at his sleeve, "we should go home. Timmy's getting cold again." Home. The word felt hollow now. Their cabin wasn't home without their parents. but it was all they had. "We're not going back to the cabin," he decided suddenly. "The sheriff will look for us there." Emma's eyes widened. "Where will we go?" Samuel gazed toward the western edge of town, where the foothills rose toward distant mountains. His father had taken him hunting in those hills last autumn, showing him shelters and teaching him to read the land. "Away from here," he said firmly. "There's a trapper's hut Pa showed me. We can stay there until..." Until what? Until spring. Until they somehow became adults who could fend for themselves. They collected the few supplies they'd been given and slipped away from Pinewood Creek as the early winter dusk settled over. The town. No one stopped them. No one called after them. 3 small figures trudging into the gathering darkness. Just another sad story in a season full of them. The trapper's hut was farther than Samuel remembered, and in worse condition. Half the roof had collapsed under the weight of snow, and animals had clearly been using it for shelter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the stone fireplace was intact, and with the tarp from their father's hunting pack, they managed to create a sheltered corner where the wind couldn't reach. "It's like camping," Samuel told Timmy, trying to infuse his voice with an enthusiasm he didn't feel as he coaxed a small fire to life with precious matches. "I don't like camping," Timmy replied, his lower lip trembling. "I want to go home." Emma pulled their little brother into her lap, wrapping their mother's shawl around them both. "This is just temporary, Timmy, like an adventure," Samuel said, nothing as he carefully measured out a portion of cornmeal to mix with water. It would make a poor supper, but it was food. They would survive another day. That was all he could focus on now, surviving one day at a time. Night fell quickly in the mountains, the darkness absolute, except for their small fire. The wind picked up, finding every gap in their makeshift shelter. Timmy finally fell asleep against Emma's shoulder, his face flushed with cold, or perhaps the beginning of fever. Samuel fought to stay awake, feeding the fire and listening to the sounds of the wilderness around them, the creak of branches heavy with snow, the distant howl of what might have been a wolf. "Sam!" Emma's voice was barely audible over the wind. "Are we going to die out here?" The question hung between them, stark and honest, in a way that only children can be. Samuel wanted to lie, to reassure her the way their father would have. But the truth was, he didn't know. "No," he said finally, with more conviction than he felt. "We're Hayes' children. Pa always said we come from tough stock." Emma nodded, her face solemn in the firelight. "I miss them." "Me too." The fire burned low as the night wore on. Samuel dozed despite his best efforts, jerking awake when a particularly strong gust of wind sent sparks spiraling into the darkness. The cold had deepened, seeping into his bones. He added the last of their gathered wood to the dying flames, knowing it wouldn't last until morning. When the fire finally died, the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Samuel pulled his siblings closer, trying to share what little body heat they had. Emma had stopped shivering, a bad sign, he remembered his father saying once. Timmy's breathing seemed too fast, too shallow. This was how they would end then. Not in their beds at the cabin, not even in the town where someone might have eventually helped them, but here in the wilderness, forgotten by everyone. Samuel closed his eyes, exhaustion and cold overwhelming his determination to keep watch. His last conscious thought was a prayer, not for salvation, which seemed impossible now, but for it to be quick and painless when the end came. He didn't hear the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow, didn't see the tall figure that paused at the edge of their collapsed shelter, bow in hand, didn't feel the careful assessment of eyes that had tracked them from the moment they left the town's edge. Ahanu had been hunting when he first spotted their tracks, small footprints heading away from the white settlement and into the foothills where his people were camped for the winter. Curiosity had led him to follow, concern growing as he realized the tracks belonged to children traveling alone as a storm approached. Now, crouching beside the three small forms huddled together in the ruins of the old trapper's hut, he understood the gravity of their situation. These children would not survive the night without intervention. The smallest one already burned with fever despite the cold, and the girl had the telltale stillness of someone sliding toward hypothermia. Ahanu considered his options. His people were wary of white settlers, with good reason. The summer had brought renewed conflict after the victory at Greasy Grass, and tension ran high even among the more peaceful bands. Taking white children into their camp would not be a decision made lightly, and yet to leave them here would be to sentence them to death, as surely as if he had drawn his knife across their throats. The oldest boy stirred slightly, his arms tightening protectively around his siblings, even in sleep. Something in the gesture decided Ahanu. He had a son of his own, not much younger than this boy. What would he want another to do if their situations were reversed? With gentle efficiency, he wrapped the children in his spare blanket and lifted the smallest onto his back. The girl he cradled in one arm, her weight frightening in its lightness. The boy was more difficult, nearly the size of a small man, and even unconscious, he resisted being moved away from his siblings. "You must help me if they are to live," Ahanu said in the white man's tongue, unsure if the boy could hear or understand him. But something in his tone must have penetrated the boy's awareness, for he stopped struggling and staggered to his feet, swaying but determined. Together, they began the journey back to the Cheyenne winter camp, the boy stumbling alongside Ahanu, occasionally reaching out to touch his brother or sister as if to reassure himself they were still there. The storm that had been threatening finally broke, snow falling in thick curtains that reduced visibility to mere steps ahead. Ahanu kept them moving, knowing that to stop now would mean death for all of them. The boy fell more frequently as they progressed, but each time he pushed himself up without complaint, his face set in a mask of stubborn endurance that earned Ahanu's respect. It was nearly dawn when they finally reached the circle of lodges, nestled in a sheltered valley. The storm had abated somewhat, and smoke rose from the tops of several teepees, a promise of warmth and life. Ahanu made a sound in his throat, part call, part warning, and figures emerged from the nearest lodge. The boy stopped, swaying on his feet, as Ahanu's wife Naituna rushed forward to take the feverish child from his back. Another woman, Aponi, reached for the girl. The boy made a sound of protest, lurching toward his siblings. "They will be cared for," Ahanu told him, gripping his shoulder to steady him. "As will you." The last of the boy's strength seemed to leave him at these words. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed into the snow. Ahanu lifted him easily, carried him into the warmth of his family's lodge, and laid him beside his siblings, who were already being tended by the women. Naituna looked up from where she was stripping wet clothes from the small boy, her expression questioning. "These are white children." "They are children," Ahanu replied simply. The winter would have taken them before sunrise. His wife's face softened as she turned back to her task. "This one burns with fever. Aponi, bring willow bark and the cooling herbs." Outside the lodge, voices were rising as others in the camp became aware of what Ahanu had brought back from his hunt. Not game for the cookpots, but 3 white children, a complication none of them needed in this already difficult season. Keme, Ahanu's nephew, and a fierce young warrior, pushed into the lodge, his face dark with anger. "Have you lost your mind, uncle? Bringing them here?" Ahanu continued removing the older boy's wet clothing, replacing it with a warm buckskin shirt. Would you have preferred I leave them to die? Yes, Keme spat. 3 less who will grow, up to take our land and kill our people. They are children, Ahanu repeated firmly. Not soldiers, not settlers, just children whose parents have died. Halona, Ahanu's mother and respected elder, entered the lodge with quiet dignity. She knelt beside the unconscious children, placing a wrinkled hand on each of their foreheads in turn. These souls were sent to us for a purpose, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her years and wisdom. The spirits do nothing without reason. Kemi made a sound of disgust. The spirits did not tell us to adopt white orphans. The spirits guided my son to find them before they perished, Halona replied calmly. That is enough for now. The rest will become clear in time. Ahanu nodded respectfully to his mother, grateful for her support. They stay until they are... Well, what happens after will be decided when the time comes. Kame glared at the children with undisguised hostility, then turned and left the lodge, the entrance flap swinging violently in his wake. Others would share his view, Ahanu knew. The decision to help these children would not be without consequences. But as he watched Naituna gently coaxing broth between the lips of the feverish youngest child, as he saw the careful way a pony was brushing the girl's tangled hair away from her face, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever came after, he would face it with the knowledge that he had acted with honor. The oldest boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then memory and awareness returned, and he tried to sit up, panic evident in every line of his body. "Emma! Timmy!" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Ahanu placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Your brother and sister are here," he said, gesturing to where they lay nearby. "They are being cared for." The boy's gaze darted around the lodge, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the strange faces. Fear and suspicion warred with desperate gratitude in his expression. "Who are you?" he asked finally. "Where are we?" "I am Ahanu. You are in my family's lodge, safe from the storm." He offered the boy a cup of water. "And you? What is your name?" The boy hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Samuel Hayes," he said, accepting the water. "My brother is Timothy. My sister is Emma." He drank deeply, then asked, Will they be all right?" It was Nituna who answered, her English halting but clear. "The small one has fever. The girl is very cold, but they will live." She gave him a reassuring smile. "You are brave to care for them so long." Something in Samuel's face crumpled at these words, the first acknowledgement from an adult that he had been carrying an impossible burden. But he mastered himself quickly, straightening his shoulders. "Thank you for helping us," he said, formally. "But we don't want to cause trouble. When the storm passes, we'll go." "Go where?" Ahanu asked quietly. Samuel had no answer for this. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft sounds of the lodge, the crackling fire, Timmy's labored breathing, the quiet murmur of women's voices as they worked. "Rest now," Ahanu said finally. "There will be time for decisions later." Samuel wanted to protest, to insist that he needed to stay awake and vigilant. But the warmth of the lodge and the bone-deep exhaustion of their ordeal conspired against him. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite his determination, he soon drifted back into sleep. Ahanu watched the boy's breathing even out, noting the protective way he had positioned himself, even in sleep, to be between the lodge entrance and his siblings. Such responsibility on such young shoulders. "He has an old soul," Halona observed, following Ahanu's gaze. "The spirits chose well when they guided you to them." "Not everyone will see it that way," Ahanu replied, thinking of Kem's anger and the discussions that would inevitably follow. His mother patted his arm. "The right path is rarely the easy one, my son. You have brought these children to us for a reason. Trust that the purpose will reveal itself in time." Outside, the wind had died down, and the snow fell gently, covering their tracks and smoothing the landscape into featureless white. In the trapper's hut, where Ahanu had found them, the last embers of their fire were long cold, the shelter filling with snow through the collapsed roof. By nightfall, there would be no evidence that 3 children had ever sought refuge there. In Pinewood Creek, Sheriff Wilson sat at his desk, a half-empty bottle before him. He'd meant to check on those Hayes orphans. Truly he had. But the storm had made the roads impassable, and there were other matters demanding his attention. Perhaps tomorrow, he thought, pouring another drink. If the weather cleared, they'd be fine at their cabin for another day or 2. But in the Cheyenne winter camp, nestled in a protected valley away from the worst of the elements, 3 orphaned children slept in safety for the first time since their parents' deaths. Whatever uncertainties the future held, for this moment, at least, they had found refuge from the winter's cruel grasp. Samuel woke to unfamiliar sounds, the soft murmur of voices speaking in a language he didn't understand, the crackling of a well-maintained fire, the gentle clinking of bone ornaments. Swaying from the lodge poles above, for a moment, disorientation kept him motionless, his mind struggling to make sense of his surroundings. Then memory flooded back, and he sat up abruptly, eyes searching frantically for his siblings. Relief washed over him as he spotted them. Emma was sitting cross-legged near the fire, watching intently as a Cheyenne woman demonstrated how to weave a small basket. His sister's face was still pale, but her eyes were alert, curious. On the other side of the lodge, Timmy lay on a bed of soft furs, his small chest rising and falling in the deep, even rhythm of healing sleep. The angry flush of fever had faded from his cheeks. "Your brother's fever broke during the night," said a voice beside him. Samuel turned to find Ahanu seated nearby, working a piece of wood with a small knife. "Nituna's medicine is strong." Samuel swallowed, his throat dry with more than thirst. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for the debt he felt, "for everything." Ahanu nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You slept for 2 days. Your body needed healing as much as your spirit." 2 days. Samuel tried to process this information. 2 days of complete vulnerability in a place surrounded by strangers, people his father had alternately described as noble savages or bloodthirsty heathens, depending on his mood and the stories circulating in town. "Emma seems okay," Samuel ventured, watching his sister laugh softly at something the Cheyenne woman said. "A pony has daughters of her own," Ahanu explained, following Samuel's gaze. "She says your sister has clever hands." A small, tentative warmth kindled in Samuel's chest at the praise of his sister. It had been so long since anyone had spoken of them with anything but pity or dismissal. The lodge flap opened, admitting a gust of cold air and a young Cheyenne man whose face hardened instantly. Upon seeing Samuel awake, he spoke rapidly to Ahanu, his tone clipped and challenging. Ahanu responded calmly, his voice low but firm. Though Samuel couldn't understand the words, he recognized the cadence of an argument, one that had likely been ongoing during his 2 days of unconsciousness. The young man, Keme, Samuel would later learn, shot him a final glare before dropping a brace of rabbits near the fire and stalking out. "He doesn't want us here," Samuel stated flatly, recognizing the hostility for what it was. Ahanu sighed, setting aside his carving. "Keme lost his father to white soldiers last summer. His heart is still bleeding from that wound." Samuel absorbed this information silently. He had heard whispered conversations about conflicts with the native tribes, stories traded in the general store when the men thought children weren't listening. There had been a great battle the previous summer, a defeat for the U.S. Army that had sent ripples of fear throughout the frontier settlements. "We can leave," Samuel offered, though the thought of taking his siblings back into the winter wilderness made his stomach clench with dread. Once, Timmy's better. Ahanu studied him with dark eyes that seemed to see more than Samuel was comfortable, revealing. And go where? It was the same question he had asked before, and Samuel still had no answer. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. Finally, Ahanu stood, his movement fluid and deliberate. "Come, you should eat, and then we will talk more." Samuel followed him to the fire, where Naituna handed him a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew. The rich aroma made his stomach growl embarrassingly loud, reminding him how long it had been since he'd eaten properly. Emma scooted closer, her shoulder pressing against his in a gesture of solidarity. "It's good," she whispered. "Like when Mama made venison stew, but with different plants." Samuel took a cautious bite and found she was right. The flavors were unfamiliar, but satisfying, warming him from the inside out. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, aware of the precious nature of food in winter. As they ate, more members of the Cheyenne band drifted into the lodge, some clearly coming to see the white children who had become the camp's most unusual winter guests. An older woman with a face deeply lined by time and weather settled beside Ahanu, her gaze sharp and assessing as she studied the Hayes children. "This is my mother, Halona," Ahanu introduced her, "an elder whose wisdom guides our band." Samuel set down his empty bowl and straightened, instinctively feeling that this woman's opinion of them mattered deeply to their future. "Thank you for allowing us to stay in your camp," he said, pulling on every lesson in manners his mother had ever taught him. Alona's lips curved slightly. "It was not a decision put to vote, young one. My son follows his heart, even when his head might counsel otherwise." Her English was more practiced than Ahanu's, her accent lilting but clear. Emma, usually shy around strangers, spoke up unexpectedly. "Are you a medicine woman? The lady who helped Timmy had special herbs." "That was Nituna, my son's wife," Halona replied. "I was a healer in my younger days. Now I mostly dispense advice that the young pretend to heed." There was a dry humor in her tone that transcended cultural differences. Emma smiled, responding to the warmth beneath the elder's dignified exterior. "Our grandmother was like that. Papa used to say she could talk sense into a fence post." A ripple of laughter went through the gathered Cheyenne. Samuel marveled at his sister's ability to find connection where he saw only obstacles. It had always been that way, Emma building bridges while he constructed walls. The conversation shifted to Cheyenne, with occasional translations offered to the Hayes children. Samuel learned that they were in a winter camp nestled in a valley that offered protection from the worst of the storms. Game was scarce but not absent, and the band had prepared well for the cold months with stored foods and supplies. What wasn't directly stated, but Samuel intuited nonetheless, was that 3 additional mouths to feed represented a significant strain on carefully managed winter resources. The knowledge sat uneasily in his stomach, souring the meal he'd just enjoyed. Later, when most of the visitors had departed and Timmy had woken long enough to eat a small portion of food before drifting back to sleep, Ahanu beckoned Samuel outside. The cold hit him like a physical blow after the warmth of the lodge, but the air was crisp and clear, the storm having passed during his long sleep. The Cheyenne winter camp spread before him. Perhaps a dozen lodges arranged in a rough circle, smoke rising from their tops. Children played in the packed snow, while women worked at outdoor tasks. Men repaired equipment or gathered in small groups to talk. It was a scene of community and purpose that made Samuel's chest ache with a complex emotion he couldn't name. "Your people have questions," Ahanu said, breaking into his thoughts. "As do mine. It would be good to have answers." Samuel nodded, understanding the implicit request for their story. He followed Ahanu to a fallen log cleared of snow. where they sat side by side, looking out over the camp. "Our parents died of fever," Samuel began, the words still difficult to speak aloud. "About 2 weeks ago. We stayed in our cabin until the food ran out, then went to town for help. And there was none to be found?" Ahanu's tone was neutral, neither accusing nor pitying. Samuel shrugged, a gesture that tried to contain the hurt and betrayal he still felt. "The pastor gave us some food. The sheriff said he'd come check on us, but he never did. Mr. Garrett at the store barely spared enough to last a day." He paused, then added the truth that had driven them from Pinewood Creek. "They were talking about sending us on an orphan train, splitting us up." Ahanu was silent for a moment, digesting this information. "And so you fled into the winter, choosing possible death over certain separation." "We're family," Samuel said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps to Ahanu it did, for he nodded in understanding. "Family is the center that holds all else together," the Cheyenne man agreed. "This I understand well." He gazed across the camp to where his own son was helping an older boy stretch a hide. "But now you face a different problem. You are among people who have reason to distrust those who look like you." Samuel frowned, picking at a loose thread on his borrowed buckskin shirt. "We never did anything to your people." "No," Ahanu acknowledged. "But to many here, that distinction matters little. They see only that you are white, and whites have brought our people much suffering." "Like what happened to Kame's father?" Samuel asked, remembering the angry young man from earlier. Ahanu's expression darkened. "Yes, and many others. The soldiers come, and when they cannot find warriors to fight, they burn lodges and take food stores. They make promises in treaties, then break them before the ink is dry." He shook his head. "It is an old story, getting older with each passing season." Samuel absorbed this in silence. His father had occasionally spoken of Indian troubles as an unfortunate necessity of progress. Sitting here now in a camp of people who had saved his life and his siblings, those dismissive words rang hollow. "So what happens to us now?" he finally asked, voicing the question that had hovered at the edges of his mind since waking. Ahanu turned to look at him directly. "That depends partly on you, Samuel Hayes. My people will watch how you behave, how you receive what is offered, how you contribute what you can. Some, like Kame, will look for reasons to send you away once the weather permits. Others, like my mother, see your arrival as significant, perhaps even guided by the spirits." "And you?" Samuel couldn't help asking. "What do you think?" The Cheyenne man's gaze was steady. "I think 3 children should not die in the snow for the sins of others. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we will see what path unfolds before us." It wasn't the reassurance Samuel had hoped for, but it was honest. He appreciated that more than false promises. "I can work," he offered. "I'm strong for my age. My father taught me to chop wood, to set snares. I can help hunt." A faint smile touched Ahanu's lips. "Good. There will be tasks enough for willing hands." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "For now, rest and regain your strength. Let your brother heal. The winter is long, and decisions need not be rushed." As they walked back toward the lodge, Samuel noticed Keme watching them from across the camp, his expression cold and evaluative. The young Cheyenne warrior wasn't the only one observing their exchange. Other eyes followed their progress, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. Samuel straightened his spine and lifted his chin, refusing to show the fear and uncertainty that churned inside him. Whatever happened next, he would face it with as much dignity as he could muster. His siblings were counting on him. Inside the lodge, he found Emma helping Netuna prepare vegetables for the evening meal, her small hands mimicking the Cheyenne woman's practiced movements. Timmy was awake and sitting up, looking fragile but dramatically improved as a Cheyenne. Boy, perhaps a year older, showed him a carved wooden horse. "Sam!" Timmy's face lit up. "Look what Missou gave me." He held up the toy proudly. Samuel managed a smile, grateful for his brother's resilience. "That's very nice of him. Did you say thank you?" Timmy nodded vigorously. "In his language, too. Ne mehotatse." The Cheyenne boy, Missou, grinned, clearly pleased with Timmy's attempt at his language. He said something to Timmy that included the word horse and made galloping motions with his hands. Samuel watched them play, a complex mixture of emotions tightening his throat. They were alive, warm, fed, more than he could have hoped for when they huddled in that collapsing trapper's hut, but they were also utterly dependent on the goodwill of people who had every reason to resent them. How long would that goodwill last? And what would happen when it ran out? The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm, a tentative coexistence that was neither fully comfortable nor openly hostile. Samuel threw himself into any work offered, determined to prove his worth. He chopped wood until blisters formed and broke on his hands, learned to set snares under the bemused tutelage of an older Cheyenne man, and helped with the endless task of keeping the winter camp functioning in the harsh conditions. Emma, with her quick mind and gentle demeanor, found her place more easily. She shadowed the women, learning their crafts and picking up Cheyenne words with an ease that amazed everyone. Within a week, she was carrying on simple conversations, her laughter blending with that of the Cheyenne girls her age as they worked and played. Timmy, once recovered from his fever, became the unexpected bridge between the worlds. Children, it seemed, required less reason to accept one another than adults did. He spent his days trailing after Missou and the other young boys, returning to the lodge at night full of new words and experiences, his previous life in Pinewood Creek fading like a half-remembered dream. One morning, as Samuel was helping clear snow from the central area of the camp, Kimé approached him. The young warrior had avoided direct interaction with the Hayes children thus far, his disapproval evident in every glance and gesture. "You hold the axe wrong," Kemi said abruptly, watching Samuel struggle with a particularly stubborn log. Samuel paused, sweat freezing on his brow despite the cold. "Oh?" Without further comment, Keme took the axe, demonstrated a different grip and stance, then handed it back. Samuel tried the new technique, finding immediately that it required less force to split the wood. "Thanks," he said, genuinely grateful, "for the tip." Keme shrugged, his expression still guarded, but perhaps a fraction less hostile than before. Wasting energy is foolish in winter. It wasn't friendship, not even close, but it was the first voluntary interaction Keme had initiated. Samuel counted it as progress. That evening, as they gathered in Ahanu's lodge for the evening meal, Halona announced that it was the night of the winter storytelling. "The children should join us," she said, her tone making it clear this was not merely a suggestion. Netuna nodded, handing out bowls of rabbit stew thickened with wild rice and dried berries. Stories teach. They should learn. Samuel exchanged glances with Emma, who looked delighted at the prospect. Even Timmy, usually tired by this hour, perked up at the mention of stories. After the meal, they made their way to the largest lodge in the camp, where most of the band had already gathered. A central fire cast dancing shadows against the lodge walls, creating an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation. The Hayes children found places at the edge of the circle, conscious of their status as outsiders in this sacred ritual of community. Halona took her place near the fire, her face transformed by the flickering light into a mask of ageless wisdom. She began to speak in Cheyenne, her voice rising and falling in rhythmic cadence that captivated even those who couldn't understand her words. To Samuel's surprise, Ahanu settled beside them, quietly translating his mother's words. "She tells the story of how Coyote brought fire to the people," he murmured. "Listen well." The tale unfolded, a story of cleverness and sacrifice, of one creature's determination to help others despite the cost to himself. As Helona spoke, Samuel found himself drawn into the narrative, forgetting momentarily the strangeness of his surroundings and the precariousness of their position. Other storytellers followed, elders sharing tales of the people's history, of great hunts and brave warriors, of tricksters and spirits, and the creation of the world. Some stories made the listeners laugh, others brought solemn nods of recognition at shared wisdom. Through it all, Ahanu translated patiently, bridging the gap between worlds. When the formal storytelling concluded, children began pleading for their favorites, clearly well-known tales that were part of the community's shared heritage. To Samuel's astonishment, several young voices called Timmy's name, urging him forward. "They want to hear the story you told Misu," Ahanu explained, seeing Samuel's confusion, "about the boy who climbed the beanstalk to find giants." Timmy's eyes widened. "Jack and the beanstalk? But I don't know if I remember it all right." Emma squeezed his hand. "I'll help you if you get stuck." With encouraging nods from around the circle, Timmy made his way to the storyteller's place, his small figure illuminated by the fire's glow. For a moment he looked terrified, but then Misu called out something encouraging and his shoulders relaxed. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice small but clear, "there was a boy named Jack who lived with his mother. They were very poor." As Timmy recounted the familiar fairy tale, Ahanu translated for those who didn't understand English. Samuel watched in wonder as his little brother's confidence grew, his hands gesturing expressively to illustrate the giant beanstalk, the enormous castle, the terrifying giant. The Cheyenne listeners were enthralled, leaning forward to catch every word. When Timmy reached the climax of Jack chopping down the beanstalk with the giant in pursuit, even the most stoic warriors were engaged, nodding in approval at the clever hero's victory. "And they lived happily ever after," Timmy concluded, with the traditional ending, "the end." For a moment there was silence. Then a wave of appreciative sounds swept through the lodge. Misu bounded forward to clap Timmy on the back, clearly proud of his friend's performance. Even Kemi, Samuel noticed, had a reluctant smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Helona spoke, her words directed at Timmy but loud enough for all to hear. Ahanu translated, "My mother says that stories are how we recognize each other as human beings. That your people and ours share the joy of a good tale reminds us of what we have in common, not just what separates us." As they made their way back to Ahanu's lodge later that night, Timmy skipping ahead with the boundless energy of childhood, Emma leaned close to Samuel. "It feels different now," she whispered. "Like maybe we could belong here." Samuel nodded, not quite ready to voice the hope that had begun to take root in his own heart. One evening of shared stories didn't erase the deeper conflicts between their worlds, but perhaps it was a beginning. The following days saw subtle shifts in the dynamics of the camp. The Hayes children were still outsiders, still regarded with suspicion by some, but the overt hostility had lessened. Samuel found himself included in hunting parties, though always under watchful eyes. Emma was invited to join the women in more complex crafts, her quick learning and respectful attention earning grudging approval. And Timmy, irrepressible, adaptable Timmy, moved between worlds with the ease of a child who hadn't yet learned. All the reasons why he shouldn't. His friendship with Misu deepened, the boys developing a mixed language of English, Cheyenne, and elaborate hand gestures that served them well enough for play. 2 weeks after their arrival in the Cheyenne camp, Samuel was helping repair one of the lodges damaged in a heavy snowfall when a Hanu approached, his expression grave. "Hunters have returned from the direction of your settlement," he said without preamble. "They report men on horseback searching the foothills. 3 riders." Samuel's hands stilled on the sinew he was threading. "Looking for us?" Ahanu nodded. "It seems likely. They follow old tracks, asking questions of the land." A cold that had nothing to do with the winter air settled in Samuel's stomach. "The sheriff," he guessed, "probably with Mr. Garrett and maybe Pastor Miller." He looked up at Ahanu, fear sharpening his voice. "What will happen if they find us here?" The Cheyenne man's face hardened. "Nothing good. White men finding white children in our camp. They would not see rescue. They would see kidnapping." The implications didn't need to be spelled out. Samuel had heard enough stories of reprisals against native tribes, justified or not, to understand the danger their presence now posed to the people who had saved them. "We should leave," he said, the words tearing at something newly fragile inside him, "before they track us here." Ahanu was silent for a long moment, his gaze traveling across the camp to where Emma sat with a group of women, laughing as they worked on winter moccasins. Further away, Timmy and Misu were engaged in an elaborate game involving carved figures in the snow. "Perhaps," he finally said, "but snow comes again tonight. The riders will seek shelter. We have time to consider our options." Samuel wanted to argue that delay only increased the risk, but he bit back the words. The thought of taking his siblings back into the wilderness, of leaving the first place they'd felt safe since their parents' deaths, was almost physically painful. That evening, as snow began to fall in thick, silent curtains, Ahanu called a council in the central lodge. All adults were present, their faces solemn in the firelight. To Samuel's surprise, he was invited to attend, though Emma and Timmy remained behind with Nituna. The discussion was conducted primarily in Cheyenne, with Ahanu occasionally translating key points for Samuel's benefit. The options seemed clear enough: return the Hayes children to the search party, help them escape to another location, or hide them within the camp and deny any knowledge of their existence. Each choice carried significant risks. Returning them meant potential separation via the orphan train. Helping them escape meant another dangerous journey through winter conditions. Hiding them risked violent confrontation if the children were discovered. Keme spoke forcefully, his gestures sharp with emotion. "He says we should not risk the safety of the entire band for 3 white children," Ahanu translated, his tone neutral. Others nodded in agreement, though Halona's expression remained thoughtful, her eyes often resting on Samuel as the debate continued. Finally, she raised her hand, and immediate silence fell. Her words came slowly, deliberately, each one weighted with the authority of her position as elder. Ahanu translated, "My mother says that when the spirits guided me to find you, they set all our feet on a new path. To turn back now would be to question their wisdom. She believes you were sent to us for a purpose, one that may not yet be clear to any of us." Murmurs rippled through the gathering, some skeptical, others considering. Halona continued speaking, her gaze now sweeping the assembled Cheyenne. "She reminds us of the old stories," Ahanu said, "of times when our people adopted those from other tribes, even enemies who were lost or abandoned. She says sometimes the strongest bonds come from the most unlikely beginnings." Keme interrupted, his voice sharp with objection. Halona listened, then responded with equal force, though her voice never rose. "Keme argues that those were different times, before the white man's betrayals," Ahanu explained. "My mother answers that the principles that guided our ancestors should still guide us now, or we become what we claim to hate." The debate continued, voices rising and falling as various members of the band expressed their views. Samuel sat quietly, acutely aware that his future and that of his siblings hung in the balance of this discussion conducted in a language he barely understood. Finally, Ahanu himself spoke at length, his words measured and deliberate. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the lodge. One by one, people nodded, some reluctantly, some with greater conviction. Ahanu turned to Samuel. "It is decided. You and your siblings will remain hidden among us for now. If the searchers come to our camp, you will stay in the hidden storage pit beneath my lodge, where we keep food safe from animals. Once they have gone, we will decide the next step." Relief and gratitude washed over Samuel in equal measure. "Thank you," he said, the words woefully inadequate. "We won't forget this." Ahanu's expression was solemn. "Remember that not all agreed with this decision. Some took a great risk to support you. Honor their choice by behaving with caution in the days to come." The council dispersed, people returning to their lodges as the snow continued to fall, veiling the camp in white silence. Samuel made his way back to Ahanu's lodge, where Emma and Timmy waited anxiously for news. "We're staying," he told them, watching hope bloom on their faces, for now at least. Later that night, as his siblings slept soundly nearby, Samuel lay awake, listening to the wind outside the lodge. Somewhere in the darkness, men on horseback were searching for them, men who represented a world that had failed them when they needed it most. And here, among people who had every reason to turn them away, they had found shelter, food, and perhaps the beginnings of something that felt almost like belonging. The irony wasn't lost on him. Whatever happened next, Samuel knew that his understanding of the world had been forever altered. The neat divisions his father had taught him, civilized and savage, good and bad, us and them, had blurred beyond recognition. Tomorrow they would hide from their own kind, protected by those they had been taught to fear. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. Instead, as sleep finally claimed him, Samuel found himself wondering if perhaps Halona was right. Maybe there was a purpose to all of this, one that would only become clear with time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks and covering the camp in a pristine blanket of white, as if nature itself was conspiring to hide them from those who searched. Dawn broke with painful brightness over the Cheyenne camp. Sunlight, reflecting off fresh snow with an intensity that hurt the eyes. Samuel woke early, the previous night's council meeting weighing heavily on his mind. He slipped quietly from beneath the warm buffalo robes, careful not to disturb Emma and Timmy, who still slept soundly. Natuna was already awake, tending the morning fire with practiced efficiency. She glanced up as Samuel moved toward the lodge entrance, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. Outside, the camp was stirring to life despite the bitter cold. Samuel paused, letting the crisp air fill his lungs as he surveyed what had become, improbably, their temporary sanctuary. Smoke rose from lodge tops, mingling with the pale winter sky. Children's laughter echoed as they cleared fresh paths between dwellings. In the central area, men gathered to discuss the day's hunting plans, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Ahanu emerged from a nearby lodge, spotting Samuel immediately. The Cheyenne man made his way over, his expression grave. "The scouts have returned," he said without preamble. "The riders from your town have made camp 5 miles to the east. They will reach us by midday if they maintain their course." Samuel's stomach tightened. "What do we do?" "Prepare the hiding place," Ahanu replied, "and hope they do not stay long." Together, they returned to Ahanu's lodge, where Ahanu showed Samuel the storage pit beneath the sleeping platform, a clever hollow dug into the frozen earth and lined with furs to protect winter provisions from both cold and scavengers. It was meant for food, not people, but it would have to serve. Samuel helped enlarge the space, scraping away soil with a bone tool until it seemed large enough to hold 3 children in cramped but manageable conditions. "We will put furs here," Ahanu said, gesturing to the earthen floor. "And these dried herbs will mask your scent if they bring dogs." He held up a bundle of pungent plants that made Samuel's nose wrinkle. Emma and Timmy woke to these preparations, their faces registering confusion that quickly transformed to fear as Samuel explained the situation. Timmy's lower lip trembled. "Will we have to leave Misu and everyone?" he asked, his voice small. Samuel exchanged glances with Ahanu, uncertain how to answer. The Cheyenne man knelt before Timmy, his expression softening. "For now, you must only hide. The men from your town must not find you here. What comes after?" He hesitated, then continued gently, "That path is not yet clear." Emma, practical as always, began gathering their few possessions, the clothes they had arrived in, now cleaned and mended, their mother's Bible, a small wooden horse Misu had carved for Timmy. "How long will we need to hide?" she asked. "Until they are gone," Ahanu replied. "Hours, perhaps, a day at most. They will not linger long in a Cheyenne camp, especially as the weather worsens." He glanced toward the lodge entrance where light snow had begun falling again. Earlier than predicted, the morning passed in tense preparation. Nituna prepared extra food that could be kept in the hiding place: pemmican, dried berries, a skin of water. Helona visited briefly, pressing something into each child's hand, small leather pouches on cords. "Protection," she said simply. When Samuel looked at her questioningly, "Wear them close." By mid-morning, the entire camp was aware of the approaching riders. An undercurrent of tension ran through every interaction, though daily activities continued as normally as possible. Samuel noticed Kemi and several other young warriors checking weapons with casual deliberation, preparing for trouble while hoping it wouldn't come. Just before noon, Ahanu returned to the lodge, his expression tight. They approached from the east ridge. "It is time." The hiding place was ready, lined with furs and stocked with provisions. Samuel ushered Emma in first, then Timmy, before climbing in himself. Ahanu handed down a small stone lamp, just enough light to see each other's faces in the darkness. "Be silent," he instructed. "No matter what you hear, understand?" The children nodded solemnly. Ahanu held Samuel's gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them before replacing the sleeping platform that concealed the pit. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the small flame of their lamp. Samuel positioned himself protectively nearest to the entrance, with Emma and Timmy behind him. "Are we in trouble, Sam?" Timmy whispered, his small hand finding Samuel's in the dimness. Samuel squeezed reassuringly. "No. We're safe. We just need to stay quiet for a while." Above them, they could hear movement in the lodge. Nituna, continuing her daily tasks as if nothing unusual was happening. Then came the sound of approaching horses, the murmur of voices growing louder. English voices. Samuel felt Emma tense beside him. He reached over to grip her shoulder, a silent reminder to remain still. Timmy pressed his face against Samuel's, sighed, trembling slightly but making no sound. The voices grew distinct enough to make out words, a man's gruff tone, familiar enough to make Samuel's heart race. "Sheriff Wilson. Supposed to believe you haven't seen 3 white children wandering these hills?" Ahanu's measured response carried clearly. "We have seen no one. The winter has been harsh. Children alone would not survive. Then you wouldn't mind if we looked around your camp." A different voice. "Mr. Garrett," Samuel guessed. "Seeing as you've got nothing to hide." A long pause followed. Samuel could almost feel the tension radiating through the lodge floor. Then Ahanu spoke again, his tone carefully neutral. "You may look, but respect our homes and our people." Heavy footsteps circled the perimeter of the camp. Samuel closed, his eyes focusing on maintaining steady, silent breaths. Timmy's grip on his hand tightened painfully. The footsteps approached their lodge. The entrance flap was pushed aside, sending a shaft of daylight through the cracks of the platform above. "Them." Sheriff Wilson's voice came again, closer now. "Nice setup you've got here, cozy." "It serves our needs," Ahanu replied evenly. "We are a simple people." More footsteps, moving around the lodge. Samuel froze as they passed directly over the hiding place, the platform creaking slightly under the weight. A shower of dust drifted down, catching in the lamp's glow. Timmy buried his face deeper against Samuel's side to stifle a sneeze. "What's under here?" Sheriff Wilson asked. The platform groaned as additional weight pressed upon it. "Food storage," Natuna answered, her English halting but clear. "Winter, provisions. Mind if I take a look?" Samuel's heart thundered so loudly he was certain it would give them away. He felt Emma's fingernails dig into his arm as they waited for Ahanu's response. "The space is blessed by our medicine people," Ahanu said smoothly. "If an outsider disturbs it, the food will spoil. Would you risk the hunger of children for your curiosity?" A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of Sheriff Wilson shifting his weight on the platform. Finally, he grunted, "Superstitious nonsense, but I'm not here to cause trouble." The weight lifted. Footsteps moved away from the hiding place. Samuel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "These tracks we followed," a third voice said. "Pastor Miller," Samuel recognized with a start. "They led almost directly to your camp. Strange coincidence, wouldn't you say?" "The winter preserves many tracks," Ahanu replied, "from many moons. Perhaps you followed old signs." "Perhaps," Pastor Miller said, his tone unconvinced. "Or perhaps you know more than you're telling us. 3 children are missing, their parents dead from fever. It's our Christian duty to find them." "Your Christian duty," Ahanu repeated, a subtle edge entering his voice. "Where was this duty when they sought help in your town?" An uncomfortable silence followed. Samuel could almost picture Sheriff Wilson and Pastor Miller exchanging glances, Mr. Garrett shuffling his feet in the background. "Now see here," Sheriff Wilson finally blustered. "We've done everything we could for those kids. Times are hard. For everyone." "Yes," Ahanu agreed. "Times are hard. Perhaps that is why we have seen no children. Perhaps they found no welcome where they expected it, and the winter took them. It would not be the first time the weak were abandoned by those who claimed to protect them." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Samuel found himself holding his breath again, waiting for the explosion of anger such words might provoke. Instead, Pastor Miller sighed heavily. "We've searched for 2 weeks. If they were out in this weather..." He let the thought trail off. "May the Lord have mercy on their souls. And on ours. We should head back before the snow gets worse," Mr. Garrett said, a note of relief in his voice. "Nothing more to be done here." "I suppose you're right," Sheriff Wilson agreed reluctantly. "Can't say I'm sorry to end this wild goose chase. Got better things to do than look for kids fool enough to run off into winter." Their voices began to fade as they moved toward the lodge entrance. "We appreciate your cooperation," Pastor Miller added, his tone suggesting the opposite. "If you do happen to see any sign of the Hayes children, you'll send word to Pinewood Creek? If we see anything, you will know," Ahanu promised, the careful ambiguity of his words lost on the white men, but not on Samuel. The lodge flap closed. Footsteps receded. Above the hiding place, Natuna moved around the lodge, resuming her tasks. The children remained motionless in their concealment, uncertain whether it was truly safe to relax. Long minutes passed before the platform shifted and light flooded the hiding place. Ahanu's face appeared in the opening. "They are gone," he said, "riding back toward your settlement." Samuel helped Emma and Timmy out of the pit, all 3 blinking in the relative brightness of the lodge. Timmy immediately ran to Nituna, who enfolded him in a quick, fierce hug before busying herself at the fire, her expression carefully composed. "They've given up looking for us," Emma said, her voice a mixture of relief and something darker. Hurt perhaps at how easily they had been abandoned, not once but twice now. Samuel nodded, unable to find words for the complex emotions churning inside him. Part of him had expected, hoped even, that the men from Pinewood Creek would search more diligently, would insist on a more thorough investigation of the Cheyenne camp. Their quick acceptance of defeat felt like final confirmation of what he had already known. No one from their old life truly cared what happened to the Hayes children. Ahanu watched them closely, reading the emotions that crossed their faces. "Their shame made them eager to believe you are beyond finding," he said quietly. "It is easier for them to think you dead than to face their failure." Samuel's throat tightened. "So what happens now?" Before Ahanu could answer, Keme entered the lodge, snow dusting his shoulders. He spoke rapidly to Ahanu in Cheyenne, gesturing toward the eastern ridge where the riders had disappeared. "What is it?" Samuel asked when their conversation ended. "The snow is getting worse," Ahanu explained. "A big storm comes. The men from your town ride straight into it. Keme believes they will be forced to make camp soon, and in these conditions." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. The same dangers that had nearly claimed the Hayes children now threatened the men from Pinewood Creek. Samuel was surprised by the conflicting emotions this realization provoked. Concern for fellow human beings, warring with a bitter sense that justice was being served. "Will you help them?" Emma asked, her moral compass apparently clearer than her brother's. Ahanu glanced at Keme, whose expression had hardened. "That is being discussed," he said carefully. "Not all think we should risk our people for men who would look at us with suspicion even as we save them." "Like you risked yourselves for us?" Samuel said quietly. Something shifted in Ahanu's expression. He spoke to Keme again, this time with more authority. The younger man argued briefly before giving a reluctant nod and departing. "I have sent scouts to find them and guide them to better shelter than they will manage on their own," Ahanu told the children. "Whether they accept such help," he shrugged, "that is for them to decide." By nightfall, the storm had developed into a full blizzard, howling around the lodge with ferocious intensity. The entire camp battened down, extra fuel stacked by fires, lodge flaps secured against the driving snow. Through it all, Samuel found himself wondering about the men from Pinewood Creek, whether they had found adequate shelter, whether they had accepted the Cheyenne scouts' assistance if it was offered, whether they now regretted their hasty departure. The storm raged for 2 days, confining everyone to their lodges except for essential tasks. When it finally broke, revealing a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts, Keme and 2 other warriors went to check on the white men's fate. They returned by midday with news that traveled quickly through the camp. The men from Pinewood Creek had indeed been caught in the storm, but had managed to find shelter in a rocky overhang. They were cold and hungry but alive, and had accepted the food the Cheyenne offered before continuing their journey back to town. "They asked no more questions about you," Ahanu told Samuel later. "I believe they have made peace with your loss." The words should have stung, but instead, Samuel felt an odd sense of liberation. If Pinewood Creek had given up on finding them, if the Hayes children were presumed dead, then perhaps they were truly free to determine their own path forward. The days that followed brought a subtle shift in the Hayes children's status within the camp. Having successfully hidden them from their own people, the Cheyenne seemed to regard them less as temporary guests and more as something approaching members of the community. Keme, while still reserved, no longer watched them with open suspicion. Other families began inviting them to share meals or participate in evening activities. Emma flourished in this environment, her natural warmth and curiosity earning her acceptance among the Cheyenne women. She spent hours learning their crafts, beadwork, quill work, the preparation of hides, absorbing their language and customs with an enthusiasm that delighted her teachers. Though she still carried their mother's Bible with her everywhere, reading from it each night, she embraced the new knowledge offered with open arms. Timmy had become all but inseparable from Misu, the two boys developing the deep, uncomplicated friendship of childhood. He moved through the camp with growing confidence, his speech a charming hybrid of English and Cheyenne that often left adults from both cultures hiding smiles. The trauma of their parents' deaths and subsequent abandonment seemed to fade a little, more each day, replaced by the resilience that is childhood's greatest gift. For Samuel, adaptation came more slowly. Though he participated willingly in hunting and other male activities, though he worked diligently to learn the Cheyenne language and ways, something held him back from full integration. Perhaps it was his age. At 12, he remembered their former life more vividly, felt the weight of responsibility more keenly. Or perhaps it was simply that he, unlike his younger siblings, could never quite forget that their presence in the camp had begun as charity, not choice. One particularly cold morning, Samuel joined a hunting party led by a Hanu. Game had grown scarce as winter deepened, forcing the hunters to range farther from camp. Keme was among the group, as was a Hanu's teenage son, Pajakok, who had recently returned from visiting relatives in another band. They traveled in silence through the snow-blanketed forest, following the faint tracks of deer that had passed during the night. Samuel concentrated on moving as quietly as the Cheyenne hunters, though his efforts still felt clumsy by comparison. Every snapped twig or displaced snow felt like a personal failure, a reminder of how much he had yet to learn. By midday, they had seen nothing but the tracks of small game, rabbits and squirrels, hardly worth the energy of pursuit, given the meager meat they would provide. A Hanu called a brief halt, the hunters sharing dried meat and snow melted in their hands for water. "The deer have moved higher," Keme observed, nodding toward the mountain slopes that rose to the west. "We should follow." A Hanu considered this, studying the sky. There may be snow later, higher ground would be dangerous. "We need meat," Pajakok pointed out. "The children and elders cannot go hungry." The reference to children now included Emma and Timmy, Samuel realized. His siblings had been folded into the general category of those the hunters provided for, neither singled out nor excluded. After brief discussion, Ahanu decided they would split into two groups. He would take Pajakok and two others to check. A valley to the north, where deer sometimes sheltered, Keme would lead Samuel and one other hunter into the higher elevations to follow the tracks they had found. Samuel was startled to be included in Keme's group. The young warrior had become less openly hostile, but this was the first time he had voluntarily accepted Samuel's company. As they separated from the others, Samuel felt both pride at being trusted with the more challenging route and anxiety about measuring up to Kim's expectations. The climb was arduous, the snow growing deeper as they ascended. Samuel's legs burned with effort, his lungs aching in the cold air. Keme set a punishing pace, pausing only occasionally to check the deer sign or survey the terrain ahead. The third hunter, an older man named Tahem, brought up the rear, ensuring Samuel didn't fall too far behind. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a sparsely wooded plateau. The deer tracks were fresher here, offering renewed hope. Keme held up a hand, signaling for absolute silence as they crept forward, eyes scanning the landscape for movement. Samuel caught it first, a flash of brown against the white, nearly hidden by a stand of pines. He froze, then carefully raised his hand to catch Kem's attention, pointing subtly toward the location. Keme followed his gaze, nodding once in acknowledgement. 3 deer, a buck and 2 does, were browsing on pine needles, unaware of the hunter's presence. Keme gestured for them to spread out, indicating the approach each should take to surround the small herd. Samuel moved as directed, placing each foot with exquisite care. The bow Ahanu had made for him felt suddenly heavy in his hands, the responsibility immense. This would be his first true hunt, his first opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the band's survival. He reached his position and waited, watching Kem for the signal. The young warrior was almost invisible against the trees. His stillness, perfect. Teham too had vanished into the landscape, leaving Samuel to wonder if he was the only one visible to the keen eyes of their prey. The buck raised its head suddenly, nostrils flaring. It had caught something, a scent, a sound, some subtle disturbance in the air. Samuel held his breath, afraid even the smallest movement would alert the animal. Kame's arm moved in the prearranged signal. Samuel drew his bow in the same motion, aiming as Ahanu had taught him, not at the deer directly, but at the space it would occupy when startled into flight. His muscles strained with the effort of holding the tension. The deer bolted as arrows, flew. Samuel released, his shaft joining the others that cut through the winter air. The buck leapt, twisted, then stumbled as an arrow, Kame's, found its mark in the neck. The does scattered, one escaping clean into the trees, the other faltering as Tehem's arrow struck its hindquarter. Samuel watched his own arrow land harmlessly in the snow beyond where the deer had stood. He had misjudged the distance, the speed, or both. The failure stung sharply, intensified by the knowledge that Keme had witnessed it. The wounded doe fled, Tehem in pursuit. Keme approached the fallen buck, knife in hand for the killing stroke and the rituals that would follow. Samuel hung back, shame keeping him from approaching until Keme looked up, gesturing for him to join. "Your arrows were made too light," Kem said, surprising Samuel by addressing the technical issue rather than the miss itself. "They fly true in practice but float too long in hunting. We will make new ones." The criticism was offered matter-of-factly, without mockery or condemnation. It was, Samuel realized with a start, exactly how Keme would have spoken to any young Cheyenne on his first hunt, not singling him out for his whiteness or his outsider status, but simply treating him as a novice hunter who needed correction. "Thank you," Samuel managed, kneeling beside Keme as the warrior performed the deer-honoring ritual Ahanu had described, but Samuel had never witnessed. "Watch," Keme instructed, his movements deliberate as he offered tobacco and spoke words of thanks to the deer's spirit. "Next time, you will do this part. Next time." The words held a promise, not just of another hunt, but of continued inclusion, continued teaching. Samuel felt something tight within his chest loosen slightly. When Tahem returned, having tracked and finished the wounded doe, they prepared both animals for transport back to camp. It was grueling work in the cold, but Samuel threw himself into it with renewed energy, determined to prove worthy of Kame's surprisingly matter-of-fact acceptance. The journey down the mountain was more treacherous than the ascent, burdened as they were with the meat and hides. Darkness fell before they reached the lower slopes, forcing them to navigate by starlight through the snow-laden forest. Samuel's muscles screamed with fatigue, but he refused to complain or slow their progress. They were perhaps an hour from camp when howls echoed through the night, wolves and close. Kem and Tehim exchanged glances, their expressions grim. The scent of fresh meat would draw predators, and their small party, though armed, was vulnerable. "We must move faster," Kem decided, adjusting his burden for greater speed. "Stay close." They quickened their pace, the howls growing louder. Behind them, Samuel's heart hammered with a primal fear he hadn't experienced since the night they had been abandoned by their husbands. He found himself glancing repeatedly over his shoulder, imagining yellow eyes watching from the darkness between. Trees, The wolves materialized as shadows at the edge of visibility, 3, then 5, then more, flowing like smoke through the forest parallel to their course. They made no direct approach, but maintained their presence, escorting the hunters and their prize in a display of patient opportunism. "They wait for weakness," Tehem murmured, his voice steady despite the danger. "Show none." Samuel straightened his spine, ignoring the burning in his legs and the weight cutting into his shoulders. If Keme and Tahem could maintain this pace without faltering, so could he. The wolves paced them for nearly half an hour, occasionally testing the distance between them, retreating when Keme or Tahem made aggressive gestures with their weapons. Samuel kept a white-knuckled grip on his knife, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. They were within sight of the camp's glow when the lead wolf finally made its move, a large male that lunged from the trees toward Tahem, who carried the smaller doe. Samuel, slightly ahead, turned at the older man's shout of warning. What happened next occurred too quickly for conscious thought. Samuel dropped his portion of the buck, drew the knife at his belt, and stepped between Tahem and the attacking wolf. The blade caught the animal across the shoulder as it leapt, not a killing blow, but enough to draw blood and a yelp of pain. The wolf broke off its attack, circling warily as its packmates gathered behind it. Keem appeared at Samuel's side, bow drawn, and aimed at the lead wolf. No words were exchanged, but Samuel understood his role: hold position, protect Tahem. And the meat, show no fear. The standoff lasted only moments before howls from the camp, Cheyenne warriors responding to the wolf calls, sent the pack melting back into the forest darkness. Only when the immediate danger had passed did Samuel become aware that his hands were shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. Keme lowered his bow, turning to look at Samuel with an expression the boy couldn't interpret. "You stepped forward," Keme said simply. Samuel swallowed hard. "Tahem was behind me." "Yes." Keme nodded, as if this confirmed something important. "You defended one of the people." The significance of this statement took a moment to register. When it did, Samuel felt a rush of emotion he couldn't have named. Pride, perhaps, or belonging, or simply relief that he had acted without hesitation to protect someone who weeks ago would have been a stranger. They completed the journey, to camp in silence, but it was a different silence than before, not the awkward quiet of reluctant companions, but the comfortable wordlessness of those who have faced danger together and found each other worthy. News of the hunting parties, success, and the wolf encounter spread quickly through the camp. As the meat was distributed and prepared, Samuel found himself the recipient of approving nods and words of praise from Cheyenne, who had previously regarded him with indifference or suspicion. More significant than these, though, was Keme's simple acknowledgement as they parted for the night. "Tomorrow we make new arrows," the young warrior said, "heavier ones, for the next hunt." Samuel nodded, unable to find words for the sense of acceptance this casual invitation conveyed. As he made his way to Ahanu's lodge, where Emma and Timmy waited with eager questions about the hunt, he realized that something fundamental had shifted during his absence. For the first time since their parents' deaths, since that terrible night of abandonment in the prairie, he had acted not from desperation or mere survival, but from a place of belonging. In Ahanu's lodge, Netuna insisted on examining the shallow cuts on Samuel's hands from the hunting trip, applying a salve that stung, then soothed. Emma watched with worried eyes, but there was pride there too, pride in her brother, in what he had accomplished. Timmy bombarded him with questions about the wolves, his imagination transforming the already dramatic encounter into something approaching legend. When everyone finally settled for the night, Samuel lay awake, staring at the lodge poles visible. In the fire's diminishing glow, the memory of the wolf's eyes, the weight of the knife in his hand, the absolute certainty with which he had moved to protect Tahem, all of it replayed in his mind. But alongside these images came others. Keme teaching him to make arrows, Nituna tending his wounds, Emma's quiet pride, Timmy's excited chatter. Connections forming, strengthening, becoming something that resembled family. Outside, the winter. Night embraced the sleeping camp, stars wheeling in the vast darkness above their temporary home. The path that had led them here, from their parents' deaths to their abandonment to their rescue, seemed both impossibly random and somehow inevitable. Samuel closed his eyes, surrendering finally to exhaustion. His last conscious thought, a question without an answer. Was this where they were meant to be all along? Winter deepened into February, bringing the most brutal cold the oldest members of the band could recall. The sun appeared as a distant pale disk in the iron-grey sky, offering light but little warmth. Breath froze instantly in the air, forming delicate crystals that sparkled and fell like diamond dust. The sounds of the world contracted, wood cracking in extreme cold, the muffled crunch of snow underfoot. Voices kept low, as if the very air might shatter if disturbed. In the grip of such weather, the rhythms of life in the Cheyenne camp slowed to a deliberate pace. Hunting parties ventured out less frequently, relying more on preserved foods than fresh game. Women worked indoors at crafts and food preparation. Children, normally free to play throughout the camp, stayed closer to home lodges, inventing games that could be enjoyed in the confined spaces. For the Hayes children, this enforced proximity only accelerated their integration into Cheyenne. Daily life. Emma's fingers grew nimble with quill work and beading, her creations becoming indistinguishable from those of the women who taught her. Timmy's Cheyenne vocabulary now exceeded his English, his accent flawless in the way only young children can achieve. And Samuel, though he still struggled occasionally with the language, had become a respected presence among the young men. His quick learning and willingness to work hard, earning him a place in their circle that transcended his outsider origins. One evening, as wind howled around the lodge poles and the temperature dropped to frightening depths, Helona gathered the children near the fire for a story. Such evenings had become treasured times, the elders' tales weaving a history and worldview that slowly reshaped the children's understanding of their new home. Long ago, Helona began in her melodious Cheyenne, with Ahanu translating less and less as the children's comprehension grew. Before the people came to these mountains, we lived far to the north in a land of many lakes. In those days, our ways were different. We grew corn and squash. We built houses of earth and wood. Like our cabin? Timmy interrupted, his brow furrowed at the concept of Cheyenne living in structures like those he'd known in Pinewood Creek. Helona smiled patiently. Similar in purpose, different in form. The earth houses were cool in summer, warm in winter, and housed many families together. Timmy nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Emma leaned forward, her face intent in the firelight. Samuel noticed how naturally she had adopted the Cheyenne posture of respectful listening, her hands folded in her lap, eyes never leaving Helona's face. The people lived this way for many generations, Helona continued, until horses came to us, brought by tribes to the south. The horse changed everything. Suddenly we could travel far and fast, could hunt the buffalo that roamed the Great Plains, could move our homes to follow game and weather. She gestured toward the lodge around them. The teepee was born of this new life. Easy to move, quick to set up, suited to people who followed the buffalo herds. So you chose to change, Samuel said, the insight striking him suddenly. Your people saw something new and decided it was better for your way of life. Helona nodded approvingly. Yes, the people have always adapted when necessary. We take what works, what helps us survive, and make it our own. Her gaze moved meaningfully between the three Hayes children. This is how we remain Cheyenne, even as the world shifts around us. The message wasn't subtle, but it wasn't unwelcome either. Samuel felt something warm unfurl in his chest at the implication that their presence in the camp represented another kind of adaptation. Not an intrusion or burden, but perhaps a new element that the Cheyenne would incorporate into their continuing story. "And what about us?" Emma asked, giving voice to the question hovering in all their minds. "Are we becoming Cheyenne?" Helona considered this, her aged face solemn in the flickering light. "You are becoming who you need to be," she said finally. "The rest will be revealed in time." It wasn't a direct answer, but it carried a weight of acceptance that satisfied Emma, who nodded thoughtfully before returning her attention to the elder's story. Later that night, as they prepared for sleep, Samuel caught Ahanu watching him with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "My mother sees far," Ahanu said cryptically. "Further than most. She believes your coming here was meant to be." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Because we would have died otherwise." "No." Ahanu shook his head. "Because of what may come after, for all of us." Before Samuel could press for clarification, a commotion outside interrupted them. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet. Ahanu moved swiftly to the lodge entrance, Samuel close behind him. Outside, despite the bitter cold, most of the camp had emerged from their lodges. All eyes were turned toward the northern ridge, where 3 riders approached at a gallop, Cheyenne scouts, returning from what should have been a routine game reconnaissance. They thundered into the center of the camp, their horses lathered. Despite the freezing temperature, steam rising from the animals' heaving flanks. The lead rider, a man named Hototo, dismounted in a fluid motion and strode directly to where the council elders had gathered. He spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, his gestures sharp and urgent. Samuel caught only fragments. "Soldiers, many, 3. Day's ride." But the effect on the listeners was immediate and alarming. Faces darkened, bodies tensed, women drew children closer. Ahanu listened intently, his expression growing more grave with each word. When Hototo finished, a buzz of concerned conversation broke out among the gathered Cheyenne. Samuel tugged at Ahanu's sleeve. "What's happening?" Ahanu hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "Soldiers," he said finally. "A large party, moving through the northern passes. Hototo believes they head for the winter settlements." Samuel's stomach clenched. He knew enough of recent history to understand what this could mean. Looking for Cheyenne? Perhaps, or perhaps they merely patrol. Ahanu's tone suggested he placed little faith in this more benign interpretation. "Regardless, we must decide quickly whether to stay or move camp." The council of elders and warriors retreated to the central lodge for discussion. Ahanu, as both a respected hunter and the host of the White Children, was included. Samuel returned to their lodge, where Emma and Timmy waited with wide, worried eyes. "Is something wrong?" Emma asked immediately, always sensitive to shifts in the camp's mood. Samuel hesitated, not wanting to frighten them needlessly, but unwilling to lie. "Scouts saw soldiers to the north. The council is deciding what to do." Timmy's brow furrowed. "Are soldiers bad?" Such a simple question, with such a complicated answer. Samuel chose his words carefully. "Some are, some aren't. But right now, with things the way they are, soldiers and Cheyenne don't always get along." Emma, sharper than her years would suggest, caught the implication immediately. "Because of us. Will they think we were kidnapped?" "I don't know," Samuel admitted. "Maybe." Nituna, who had been quietly listening from across the lodge, spoke up. "Not just you," she said, her English halting but clear. "Many reasons for soldiers to come. Old fights, broken promises." She met Samuel's eyes. But yes, white children in Cheyenne camp. Not good if soldiers find. The directness of her assessment was startling, but not unkind. In the weeks they had lived among the Cheyenne, Samuel had come to appreciate their straightforward approach to difficult truths. There was no benefit in pretending dangers didn't exist, especially when survival might depend on facing them squarely. "What can we do?" Emma asked, unconsciously shifting closer to Timmy, her arm wrapping protectively around his shoulders. Natuna shook her head. "Council decides. We wait." Waiting proved difficult. The council deliberations stretched through the night, voices occasionally rising in what sounded like heated debate. The camp remained on edge, sleep elusive, as everyone wondered what dawn might bring. Samuel dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. In the small hours of the morning, Ahanu finally returned, his face lined with fatigue. He sank down beside the fire, accepting the cup of tea Natuna silently offered. "What did the council decide?" Samuel asked, keeping his voice low to avoid, waking Emma and Timmy, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion. Ahanu took a long drink before answering. "We stay for now. The winter is too harsh for moving the entire camp, especially the very old and very young. But we send a party north to learn more about the soldiers, their numbers, their purpose, their direction. And if they are coming here, then we reconsider." Ahanu's expression was grim. "But there is concern about your presence more, now than before. Some believe you should be taken elsewhere for your safety and ours." The words landed like a physical blow. Samuel had known, logically, that their position in the camp remained precarious, dependent on the goodwill of their hosts. But after weeks of growing acceptance, of building relationships and learning skills, the prospect of being sent away felt like a betrayal. "Where would we go?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Back to Pinewood Creek? They think we're dead." "No, not there," Ahanu reassured him. "There is a mission settlement 2 days' ride south. The man there, Brother James, is known to be fair-minded. He helps Cheyenne when he can, without demanding we abandon our ways." "You want to give us to a missionary?" Samuel couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. Ahanu sighed. "I said some believe this is best. Not all, not me." He studied Samuel's face in the dying firelight. "But you should understand the danger. If soldiers find you here, they will not believe you came willingly. They will assume the worst of us, and there will be violence. People will die. Perhaps Cheyenne, perhaps soldiers, perhaps both." Samuel absorbed this in silence, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He thought of Keem teaching him to make arrows, of Halona's stories by the fire, of Misu and Timmy playing their elaborate games. He thought of how Emma's face had softened in recent weeks, the haunted look fading from her eyes as she found purpose and belonging among the Cheyenne women. "We won't go," he said finally, decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "This is our home now too. We'll face whatever comes together." Something like approval flickered in Ahanu's tired eyes. "Sleep now," he said, rising. "Tomorrow brings its own challenges." Morning arrived with no improvement in the weather. If anything, the cold had intensified, the sky a blank white expanse that promised snow before nightfall. Despite the harsh conditions, a party of 5 warriors prepared to ride north as the council had decided, packing provisions and checking weapons with grim efficiency. Keme was among them, his face set in determined lines as he secured supplies to his horse. Samuel approached hesitantly, aware that their tentative friendship might not welcome interruption at such a moment. "You're going with the scouting party?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Keme nodded without looking up from his task. "Someone must see these soldiers with clear eyes." "Be careful," Samuel said, the words inadequate for the Concern, he felt. This earned him a brief glance, Kame's expression softening fractionally. I will return. There are still many things you must learn to be a proper hunter. It was as close to an acknowledgement of their bond as Keme had ever offered. Samuel swallowed past a sudden tightness in his throat. I'll practice with the bow, and while you're gone. Good. Your draw is still weak on the left side. Kim mounted his horse with practiced ease, then unexpectedly reached down to clasp Samuel's forearm in the Cheyenne gesture of respect between warriors. Watch over the camp, especially your brother and sister. Samuel returned the grip, nodding firmly. I will. He stood watching as the scouting party rode out, their figures growing smaller against the vast white landscape before disappearing over the northern ridge. Only then did he become aware of a Hanu standing nearby, observing the exchange with thoughtful eyes. Keme no longer speaks of sending you away, a Hanu commented. He would not have touched you in farewell if he still saw you as outside the circle of his concern. Samuel wasn't sure how to respond to this observation, profound in its simplicity. He's a good teacher, he said finally. Strict, but fair. Yes, Ahanu nodded, and he sees in you something worth teaching. He placed a hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder before moving away to consult with the remaining hunters about the day's activities. The camp settled into an uneasy routine as they waited for news from the scouting party. Daily tasks continued. Wood must be gathered, food prepared, children taught, but an undercurrent of tension ran beneath every interaction. Warriors took turns maintaining watch from high points around the camp. Women prepared travel packs of essential items, ready to move quickly if necessary. Even the children seemed to absorb the atmosphere of watchful waiting, their play more subdued, closer to the safety of the central lodges. 3 days passed with no word from Keme and the other scouts. Snow fell heavily on the second day, reducing visibility to a few yards and raising concerns about the scouting party's ability to navigate safely. By the third evening, worry had evolved into genuine fear that something had gone wrong. Samuel found himself unable to concentrate on the evening meal, his attention constantly drifting to the large entrance as if expectation alone could summon the missing warriors. Emma noticed his distraction, reaching across to touch his hand. They'll come back, she said with quiet confidence. Kame knows these mountains better than anyone. Before Samuel could respond, shouts erupted outside, not the triumphant. Calls that would have greeted returning scouts, but sharp cries of alarm. He was on his feet instantly, reaching for the knife he now wore habitually at his belt. Stay here, he ordered Emma and Timmy, exchanging a quick glance with Naituna, who nodded and moved to position herself protectively near the younger children. Outside, the camp had erupted into organized chaos. Warriors armed themselves, while women hurried children into lodges. Samuel spotted Ahanu conferring urgently with Tahem and several other hunters, their expressions grim in the fading light. What's happening? Samuel demanded as he approached. Ahanu turned sharply, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it. Riders approached from the west, not our scouts, at least 12 moving fast. Tahem spotted them from the high ridge. Soldiers? Samuel asked, his mouth suddenly dry. We think so. The light was poor, but Tahem saw the shape of cavalry hats. Samuel's mind raced. 12 riders was too many for a casual patrol, too few for a major military action. A search party, perhaps, or a detachment sent ahead of a larger force. How long before they reach us? An hour, maybe less. Ahanu surveyed the camp, his gaze calculating. Not enough time to break camp, not with this many people in this weather. Then we fight? Samuel hadn't meant it as a question, but his voice lifted at the end, betraying his uncertainty. Ahanu's expression hardened. If we must, but first, we hide what we can. His gaze lingered meaningfully on Samuel. Including you, And your siblings. Samuel's first instinct was to protest. He had trained alongside the Cheyenne youths, had proven himself on the hunt, had earned a place among them. But he understood immediately the wisdom in Ahanu's words. Their presence would only complicate an already dangerous situation, potentially turning a tense encounter into a bloodbath. "The storage pit again?" he asked, already mentally preparing for the confined space and enforced stillness. Ahanu shook his head. Too obvious if they search thoroughly. No, there is a place. A cave in the rocks behind the camp. Small entrance. Larger inside, used for ceremonies sometimes, but unknown to outsiders. Samuel nodded his understanding. "I'll get Emma and Timmy ready. Bring only what you can carry easily. Warm clothes, nothing else." Ahanu gripped his shoulder briefly. "Halona will guide you there. Listen to her, stay quiet, and do not leave until one of us comes for you, no matter what you hear." The gravity in Ahanu's voice sent a chill through Samuel that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What about you and Nituna and everyone else? We will receive these soldiers as peaceful Cheyenne in our winter camp. Perhaps they only seek information. Perhaps they will move on." Ahanu's expression suggested he placed little faith in this optimistic scenario. "If not, we will do what we must." Samuel wanted to say more, to thank Ahanu for all he had done for them, to offer to stay and fight alongside the men who had become his friends and mentors, to express the tumult of emotions that churned in his chest at the thought of hiding while others faced danger on their behalf. But there was no time. Already, Halona was approaching, her aged face composed but serious. "Go," Ahanu urged. "Prepare your brother and sister. Meet Halona behind my lodge in 10 minutes." Samuel raced back to the lodge, mind whirling with contingencies and fears. Inside, Emma had already begun gathering their warmest clothes, her intuition, or perhaps simple observation, having told her that trouble was imminent. "Soldiers coming," Samuel confirmed breathlessly. "We have to hide, all 3 of us, with Halona, in a cave behind the camp." Timmy looked up from where he had been playing with carved figures, his young face solemn. "Are the soldiers going to hurt our friends?" The directness of the question struck Samuel like a physical blow. "I hope not," he said, unwilling to lie, but unable to offer reassurance. He didn't feel. "The Cheyenne will try to talk to them peacefully." "But soldiers don't always listen to Indians," Emma said quietly, helping Timmy into his warmest leggings and buckskin shirt. "That's what a pony told me." Samuel couldn't argue with this assessment. "We need to be ready in 5 minutes. Just warm clothes, nothing that looks too white." He gestured at the calico dress Emma had arrived in, which Nituna had carefully preserved but which they rarely wore now, having adopted Cheyenne clothing for practical reasons. Nituna helped them prepare, her movements efficient, but her eyes troubled. As they finished, she pressed something into Samuel's hands, a small, bufflesh bag containing pemmican, dried berries, and a water skin. "If you must run further," she said simply. The implication that they might need to flee beyond the cave, that the camp itself might not be safe to return to, hung unspoken between them. Samuel accepted the bag with a nod of thanks, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the overcast sky blocking even starlight. They made their way to the rendezvous point behind Ahanu's lodge, moving as silently as possible through the snow. Halona awaited them, a small pack on her back, a walking stick in her gnarled hand. "Come," she said without preamble, setting off toward the rocky ridge that rose behind the camp. "Keep close, no talking." They followed the elder in single file, Halona leading, then Timmy, Emma, and finally Samuel bringing up the rear. The snow was deep, making progress slow and exhausting, especially for Timmy, whose legs were too short to navigate the drifts efficiently. After a few minutes of watching him struggle, Samuel hoisted his brother onto his back, ignoring the additional strain this placed on his own endurance. The climb grew steeper as they approached the ridge. Helona moved with surprising agility for her age, finding footholds and paths that Samuel would have missed in the darkness. 20 minutes of arduous travel brought them to a seemingly blank rock face where the elder paused, running her hands along the stone until she found what she sought. "Here," she murmured, gesturing them forward. A narrow crevice, barely visible even at close range, cut into the rock. "Enter sideways. Careful, wider inside." Timmy went first, small enough to slip through without difficulty. Emma followed. Then Helona, moving slower but with the confidence of familiarity. Samuel came last, the tight squeeze scraping his chest and back as he inched through the opening. Inside, as promised, the space opened up. Not a grand cavern, but a modest chamber, perhaps 15 feet across at its widest point, the ceiling high enough for Samuel to stand upright in the center. The air was noticeably warmer than outside, protected from the wind and retaining the Earth's natural heat. Helona produced a small stone lamp from her pack, lighting it to reveal walls decorated with faded pictographs, stylized figures of animals and humans, abstract symbols whose meanings were lost to Samuel. The floor had been leveled at some point in the past and contained a central fire pit ringed with stones. Old ashes suggested it had been used relatively recently, though there was no wood stacked nearby for a new fire. "Sacred place," Helona explained as the children looked around with wide eyes. "Vision seekers come here, healing ceremonies sometimes." She settled herself on a flat rock near the fire pit, arranging her aging limbs with careful deliberation. Now, hiding place. "How long will we need to stay?" Emma asked, helping Timmy arrange their clothes into makeshift sitting mats on the cold stone floor. Helona shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. "Until safe, or until necessary, to go elsewhere." The ambiguity of this answer wasn't lost on Samuel. "And if no one comes for us? If something happens to the camp?" The elder met his gaze steadily. "Then you must go south, to the mission. Brother James will help you." She reached into her tunic and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden token bearing a symbol Samuel didn't recognize. "Show him this. He will know you come from us." Samuel accepted the token, turning it over in his hands. The fact that Helona had brought it, had prepared for this contingency, spoke volumes about the seriousness of their situation. "We won't leave unless we have to," he promised, tucking the token securely into his own tunic. Helona nodded approvingly. "Good. The people need you, perhaps more than you know." Before Samuel could ask what she meant by this cryptic statement, a sound reached them from outside, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, many horses moving at speed. The soldiers had arrived at the camp. Timmy pressed himself against Emma, who wrapped her arms protectively around him. Samuel moved to the cave entrance, straining to hear what was happening below, though the distance and rock walls muffled most sounds. "Come away," Helona said firmly. "Nothing you can do now but wait." Reluctantly, Samuel rejoined the others, settling beside the cold fire pit. The small lamp cast long shadows against the cave walls, the ancient pictographs seeming to move and shift in the flickering light. Outside, the wind picked up, its mournful howl providing a fitting accompaniment to their vigil. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Timmy eventually dozed off, his head pillowed on Emma's lap. Emma herself remained awake but silent, her fingers absently stroking Timmy's hair in a soothing rhythm. Helona sat in meditative stillness, her eyes occasionally closing, but her posture suggesting alertness rather than sleep. Samuel fought against his own exhaustion, determined to remain vigilant. His mind conjured increasingly dire scenarios. soldiers ransacking the camp, arresting warriors, perhaps even worse. He tried to focus instead on practical considerations. If they needed to flee further, which direction would offer the best chance of reaching the mission? How would they navigate in unfamiliar territory? How long could they survive on the provisions Naituna had provided? A sudden increase in the wind's volume drew his attention back to the present. The storm was worsening, snow now driving horizontally. Past the cave entrance, visibility reduced to nothing. Under other circumstances, this might have been cause for concern. Now, Samuel found himself grateful for the weather's intensity. It would make any military operation more difficult, might even force the soldiers to seek shelter rather than pursue aggressive action against the camp. "Storm is good," Helona remarked, as if reading his thoughts. "Covers tracks, makes soldiers uncomfortable." There was a hint of grim satisfaction in her tone, suggesting that she viewed the weather as an ally in the Cheyenne's cause. Another hour passed, perhaps more. Time had become fluid, marked only by the gradual diminishing of the lamp's flame as its fuel was consumed. Emma had finally succumbed to sleep, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle against the cave wall. Samuel fought to keep his eyes open, jerking awake whenever his chin touched his chest. The sound, when it came, was so faint that Samuel initially thought he had imagined it, a scraping at the cave entrance, like something seeking admission. He tensed, one hand moving to the knife at his belt, the other reaching to shake Emma awake. Helona held up a restraining hand, her head tilted in listening posture. The sound came again, more distinct this time, followed by a low voice calling something in Cheyenne, a phrase Samuel recognized as a traditional greeting. Helona responded in kind, her voice carrying surprising strength. There was more scraping, and then a figure appeared in the narrow entrance, snow-covered, breathing hard from exertion. Samuel recognized Pajakok, Ahanu's teenage son, his normally stoic face tight with urgency. "You must come quickly," he said without preamble. "The soldiers search the camp. They know white children are here." Samuel was on his feet instantly. "How? Who told them?" Pajakok shook his head. "No time. Father says you must leave now. Head south as planned. The storm covers your trail, but you must have distance before dawn." "Leave?" Emma had woken at the commotion, her face confused and fearful. "Leave the camp for good. The soldiers demand we produce you," Pajakok explained grimly. "They say we kidnapped white children. They threaten to arrest all men, burn the camp if we do not comply." "But that's not true," Emma protested. "We came willingly. They rescued us." "Truth matters little to them," Helona said, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. "They see what they expect to see." Samuel's mind raced. "We could go to them ourselves, explain what happened, tell them we weren't kidnapped." Pajakok's expression turned skeptical. "You think they would believe children over their own assumptions? They would say we forced you to lie." He was right, Samuel realized with a sinking heart. No matter what they said, the soldiers would see only what confirmed their existing beliefs. Savage Indians stealing white children, not a compassionate people saving lives that white society had discarded. "What about everyone in camp?" Samuel asked. "Ahanu, Nituna, Keme, and the scouts when they return?" "Father has a plan," Pajakok said, though his tone suggested limited faith in its success. "But first, you must be safely away. He says to tell you, sometimes the bravest path is the one that seems like retreat." The words struck Samuel with the force of personal address. Ahanu knew him well enough to anticipate his reluctance to flee, his instinct to stand and fight alongside those who had become his family in all but blood. "We'll go," he decided, the words torn from him against his heart's protest. "But we need to know what's happening. Can you guide us part of the way? Tell us more as we travel." Pajakok nodded. "That is why Father sent me instead of another." I know the southern trails, and I can return to camp after seeing you safely on your way." They prepared to leave, with hurried efficiency, gathering their few possessions, adjusting clothing for the harsh conditions outside, Halona offering a brief prayer to the spirits for protection on their journey. Within minutes, they stood at the cave entrance, the storm raging beyond with undiminished fury. "The weather fights for you," Pajakok observed, pulling his buffalo robe tighter around his shoulders. "No tracks will last in this." Samuel turned to Halona, who had declined to accompany them, insisting her place was with her people in this crisis. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for all she had given them. "We will remember." The elder clasped his hands between her weathered palms. "You carry the people with you now," she said, her dark eyes intense in the lamp's dying light. "No matter where you go." With this cryptic blessing, they set off into the storm. Pajakok leading, followed by Emma with Timmy clutching her. Samuel bringing up the rear. The wind struck like a physical force, driving snow into every gap in their clothing, despite their best preparations. Visibility extended barely an arm's length ahead, making progress slow and treacherous. Pajakok navigated with uncanny certainty, finding paths through the darkness that Samuel would have missed entirely. They descended the ridge by a different route than they had climbed, moving away from the camp rather than toward it. Samuel fought the urge to look back, knowing there was nothing to see through the blinding snow, yet feeling the pull of connection to those they were leaving behind. After nearly an hour of grueling travel, they reached a more sheltered area, a grove of pines whose interlaced branches offered some protection from the worst of the storm. Pajakok called a brief halt, checking that everyone had weathered the journey thus far without injury. Timmy was struggling, his small body unsuited to fighting through deep snow and howling wind. Without discussion, Samuel hoisted his brother onto his back again, ignoring his own fatigue. Emma looked little better, her face pale with exhaustion, but she straightened her shoulders when Samuel caught her eye, refusing to be the one who slowed their progress. "How much further tonight?" Samuel asked Pajakok as they prepared to continue. 3 hours to the southern valley," the Cheyenne youth replied. "There is a hunting shelter there, small but dry. You can rest until morning, then continue to the mission 2 more days, if the weather permits." Samuel nodded his understanding. "And what's happening at the camp? You said the soldiers are searching for us?" Pajakok's expression darkened. They came just after sunset. 20 soldiers, not 12 as Taham thought. Led by a man with captain's markings and a face like stone, they surrounded the camp, rifles, ready before announcing themselves. "Did they attack?" Emma asked anxiously. "No, not yet. Their leader spoke some Cheyenne, badly, but enough. He said they had reports of white children held captive. Demanded we produce you immediately." Pajakok's lip curled slightly at the memory. Father invited him to search, told him no white children were held against their will in our camp. "A careful truth," Samuel observed. Pajakok nodded. The captain was not satisfied. He ordered his men to search every lodge, question everyone. When they found nothing, he became angry. "Accused father of hiding you." "No, which was true," Emma pointed out. "Yes, but by then you were beyond their reach and the storm was building. Father suggested they shelter with us until morning, continue their search when visibility improved." Pajakok's expression suggested grudging admiration. It was clever. The captain had little choice but to accept, with night falling and the storm worsening. "So right now the soldiers are in the camp." Samuel tried to picture it, blue uniforms among the buckskin, rifles and sabers alongside bows and stone, knives, just waiting. Yes, father gained time. But by morning, they will demand answers again. The captain spoke of bringing the entire camp to the fort for questioning if you were not found. A Pajakok's voice hardened. Such a journey in winter would kill our elders and youngest ones. The implications hung heavy in the frigid air. Samuel understood now the fullness of Ahanu's sacrifice by helping them escape. He had placed himself and his people in grave danger. Yet he had done it anyway, choosing to protect 3 white children who had come to him as strangers over his own safety. "We should go back," Samuel said suddenly, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "Tell the soldiers the truth. Make them understand we weren't kidnapped." Pajakok stared at him. "You would risk your freedom, your sister and brother's safety, to protect the people who saved us?" "Yes." Samuel met the Cheyenne youth's gaze steadily. "Wouldn't you?" For a long moment, Pajakok was silent. The winds howled, filling the space between them. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a brief flash of teeth in the darkness. "You think like Cheyenne now," he said. "But Father anticipated this too. That is why he sent me to guide you away, not another, because I would tell you his true message." "Which is," Samuel prompted when Pajakok hesitated, "that your greatest service to the people is to reach the mission safely. Brother James has influence with the white authorities. He can speak for us in ways they will hear. Testify that you were not stolen, but saved." Pajakok placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Your path south is not retreat. It is the bravest kind of advance, the kind that requires patience before victory." Samuel absorbed this, recognizing the wisdom in Ahanu's strategy, even as his heart rebelled against leaving those he had come to care for in danger. "And if we're too late, if the soldiers take action before we can reach Brother James, then you will still be free, still able to tell the truth of what happened, still able to honor the people by living as we taught you." Pajakok squeezed his shoulder once before releasing it. "This is what Father asks of you." Put that way, there was really no choice at all. Samuel nodded his acceptance, adjusting Timmy's weight on his back. "Then we should continue. The sooner we reach the mission, the sooner we can help." Emma, who had listened to this exchange, in silence stepped forward. "Sam's right, we need to go." She took Timmy's hand, her expression resolute despite her exhaustion. "For Ahanu and everyone else." They pressed on through the storm, following Pajakok's unerring sense of direction. The wind gradually lessened as they moved deeper into the southern valleys, though the snow continued to fall in thick, swirling curtains. Timmy, despite his initial energy, now drooped against Samuel's back, half asleep despite the motion and cold. The promised hunting shelter appeared as a dark smudge against the white landscape after what felt like an eternity of trudging through snow. It was little more than a lean-to built against a rocky outcropping, but it offered genuine protection. From the elements, a dirt floor, walls of stacked pine branches reinforced with hides, a small fire pit at the center. Pajakok worked quickly to start a fire, using materials stored in a weather-tight parfleche hanging from the shelter's support pole. Soon, a small but cheerful blaze illuminated the space, driving back the worst of the cold. "Rest now," he instructed, helping Emma settle Timmy onto a bed of pine boughs near the fire. "I have marked the trail to the mission with Cheyenne signs. Broken branches bent southward, stone cairns at major turns. Follow them when visibility allows." "You're not staying with us?" Emma asked, alarm sharpening her voice. Pajakok shook his head. "I must return to the camp. Father will need all help if negotiations with the soldiers go poorly." Samuel wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. Pajakok's duty was clear, as was their own. "Thank your father for us," he said instead. Tell him we won't forget what he did, what all of you did. He knows." Pajakok clasped Samuel's forearm in the warrior's farewell. "Perhaps our paths will cross again, in better times." With that, he was gone, slipping back into the storm with the silent efficiency that Samuel had come to associate with Cheyenne hunters. The shelter seemed suddenly emptier, the responsibility of what lay ahead weighing more heavily on Samuel's young shoulders. Emma busied herself with practical tasks, arranging their meager provisions, checking Timmy for signs of frostbite, adding carefully measured pieces of wood to the precious fire. Samuel sat cross-legged near the entrance, his mind churning with worries and plans. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Emma asked eventually, settling beside him. "Ahanu and everyone?" Samuel wished he could offer reassurance, but their time among the Cheyenne had taught him the value of honest speech. "I don't know. The soldiers might believe them when they say we weren't kidnapped, or they might not." Emma nodded, accepting this uncertainty with the resilience that continued to surprise him. "We'll tell Brother James everything. He'll help." "Them?" "Yes," Samuel agreed, though doubt nagged at him. How much influence could one mission priest truly have against military authorities determined to see threats in every native encampment? They fell silent, listening to the storm's diminishing fury and Timmy's soft, regular breathing. Despite his determination to keep watch, exhaustion eventually overcame Samuel, pulling him into uneasy dreams filled with soldiers' boots and Ahanu's somber eyes. Dawn arrived with surprising clarity, the storm having spent itself during the night. They woke to a transformed world, pristine white in every direction, trees bowed under the weight of fresh snow, the sky a pale, washed-out blue that promised bitter cold but fair weather. They broke their fast on pemmican and melted snow, conserving their limited supplies for the journey ahead. Timmy seemed rejuvenated by sleep and the excitement of a new adventure, his natural resilience shining through as he peppered Samuel with questions about the mission and Brother James. "Will there be other children there?" he asked, helping Emma pack their few belongings, "like at the Cheyenne camp?" "Probably," Samuel answered, though in truth he had no idea what awaited them at the mission. "But they might be different, from Missu and the others." Timmy's face fell slightly at the mention of his friend. "Will we ever see Missu again? And Nituna and everyone?" It was the question Samuel had been dreading, the one that acknowledged the possibility that their time with the Cheyenne had ended as abruptly as it had begun. "I hope so," he said, forcing conviction into his voice. "But first we need to reach Brother James and tell him what happened." They set out shortly after sunrise, Samuel leading the way as he searched for the trail markers Pajakok had described. The going was difficult. Fresh snow had buried the landscape under several feet of powder, making each step a labor. They took turns breaking trail, Samuel and Emma switching positions every half hour while Timmy followed in their footsteps. By midday, they had covered perhaps 3 miles, a dismally slow pace given the distance they needed to travel. Samuel tried to quell his rising anxiety, reminding himself that the mission wasn't expecting them. Another day or two would make little difference to their ultimate goal. They paused for a brief rest and meal at the edge of a frozen stream, sheltered by a stand of pines. Timmy's initial energy had flagged, his small face pinched with cold and fatigue despite Samuel's efforts to keep his spirits up. "How much further?" he asked, huddling close to Emma for warmth. Samuel scanned the terrain ahead, rolling hills giving way to steeper slopes, all blanketed in pristine white. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Pajakok said 2 days, but that might be at Cheyenne pace." "Which is faster than ours," Emma concluded, gently rubbing Timmy's hands between her own to warm them, "especially in this snow." Samuel nodded, calculations running through his head. At their current pace, they might need 3 days or more to reach the mission, longer than their food would last, potentially longer than their strength would hold out in these conditions. "We need to find better shelter tonight," he decided. "Somewhere we can build a real fire, maybe fashion snowshoes to make tomorrow's travel easier." Emma nodded, practical as always. "There should be more hunting shelters." The Cheyenne wouldn't leave this area without places to rest during winter hunts. She was right, of course. The challenge would be finding such a shelter without Pajakok's guidance. Samuel scanned the area again, trying to think as Ahanu and Keme had taught him. Where would a hunting party position a shelter? Near water, certainly. Protected from prevailing winds, close to game trails. Let's follow the stream, he suggested, but up toward those hills. There might be a cave or overhang we could use. They continued their journey with renewed purpose, following the course of the frozen stream as it wound between increasingly steep slopes. The physical effort of breaking trail kept them warm despite the frigid temperature, but Samuel worried about how long they could maintain this pace, especially Timmy. Late afternoon brought both challenge and opportunity. The stream disappeared into a narrow ravine, forcing them to choose between climbing the adjacent slope or finding another route. Samuel was about to suggest the latter when Emma pointed to a distinctive arrangement of stones a few yards up the hillside. 3 rocks stacked in a small cairn, exactly as Pajakok had described. "A trail marker," she exclaimed, her face brightening. "We're on the right path." Encouraged, they tackled the slope, helping each other through the deeper drifts. At the top, they found another cairn, and beyond it, visible now that they had gained elevation, the dark opening of what appeared to be a small cave set into the hillside. Approaching cautiously, mindful of Ahanu's warnings about animal dens. In winter, they discovered another hunting shelter, this one more substantial than the last. The cave entrance had been partially enclosed with a wall of stacked stones and branches, creating a windproof shelter large enough for several people. Inside, they found evidence of recent use. A well-constructed fire pit containing cold ashes, stacked firewood against one wall, even a small cache of dried meat wrapped in waxed cloth and suspended from a roof projection to keep it safe from animals. "Cheyenne?" Emma asked, examining the neat arrangement of the shelter. Samuel nodded, recognizing the distinctive construction methods. "Probably used during fall hunts. They always leave shelters prepared for the next visitor." The discovery lifted their spirits immeasurably. With proper shelter for the night and the unexpected bounty of additional food, their chances of reaching the mission successfully had improved dramatically. Samuel set about building a fire while Emma organized their supplies and helped Timmy out of his snow-crusted outer garments. As darkness fell, they huddled around the cheerful blaze, sharing a meal of dried meat and melted snow, flavored with a few precious dried berries from Naituna's provisions. For the first time since leaving the Cheyenne camp, Samuel allowed himself to believe they might actually succeed in their mission. "What do you think the mission will be like?" Emma wondered aloud, her face thoughtful in the firelight. Samuel considered this. "Different from both Pinewood Creek and the Cheyenne camp, probably. Pajakok said Brother James helps the Cheyenne. So he can't be like Pastor Miller. Do you think he'll believe us about not being kidnapped?" It was the question that had been nagging at Samuel since they'd set out. "I hope so." Helona seemed to think he would. Emma nodded, absently braiding a small section of her hair in the style the Cheyenne women had taught her. "And after that, what happens to us?" The future beyond their immediate goal, reaching the mission, convincing Brother James of the truth, securing help for the Cheyenne, was a blank that Samuel had avoided contemplating. Would they stay at the mission? Return to the Cheyenne, if it was safe to do so? Be sent to an orphanage or placed with a new family? "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll stay together. That's what matters." Emma reached over to squeeze his hand, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Beside her, Timmy had already drifted off to sleep, his small face peaceful in repose, one hand still clutching the wooden horse Misu had carved for him. They set out at dawn the next morning, fortified by rest and the shelter's provisions. Samuel had risen early to fashion crude snowshoes from flexible branches and strips of cloth torn from the hem of his tunic. Not as efficient as proper Cheyenne snowshoes, but sufficient to distribute their weight more evenly across the deep snow. The day passed in a rhythm of steady travel, punctuated by brief rests and constant vigilance for Pajakok's trail markers. The weather held fair, though clouds gathering on the western horizon suggested another storm might be approaching. Samuel pushed their pace, determined to cover as much ground as possible before conditions deteriorated again. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to change subtly, the wild, untamed quality of the mountains giving way to occasional signs of human presence. They passed a stand of trees that had been selectively harvested, the stumps showing the clean cuts of an axe rather than the rough teeth marks of beaver. Later, they crossed what appeared to be a summer trail, now buried under snow but discernible by the straight-line gap in the forest canopy. "We must be getting closer," Emma observed, hope brightening her voice. "These are signs of settlers." Samuel nodded, though his feelings were mixed. The growing evidence of white presence simultaneously brought them closer to their goal and further from the wilderness world where they had found unexpected belonging. As the short winter day began to wane, they crested a ridge and paused, breath catching at the vista spread below them. A small valley opened out, sheltered on three sides by tree-covered slopes. At its center stood a collection of buildings, a larger structure with a cross mounted on its peak, surrounded by several smaller cabins and what appeared to be garden plots buried under snow. "The mission," Samuel breathed, relief and apprehension mingling in his chest. Timmy bounced with sudden energy. "We made it!" Emma's eyes were wide as she surveyed their destination. "It looks peaceful." It did indeed. Smoke rose in straight columns from several chimneys, suggesting warmth and habitation. A split-rail fence enclosed part of the compound, though it appeared designed more to keep livestock in than intruders out. There was nothing military about the settlement, nothing that suggested suspicion or hostility toward visitors. They began their descent toward the valley, moving with renewed energy despite the day's accumulated fatigue. As they drew closer, details emerged. The main building was constructed of squared logs, its windows glowing with the warm light of lamps or candles. The smaller cabins, similarly built, were arranged in a loose semicircle around what was clearly the chapel. A figure emerged from the largest cabin, pausing to look in their direction. Samuel raised an arm in greeting, hoping they presented a recognizable enough appearance despite their Cheyenne clothing. The figure, a man tall and lean, shaded his eyes against the setting sun, then beckoned them forward with a sweeping gesture of welcome. Relief flooded through Samuel. They had been seen, acknowledged, invited in. Whatever came next, they had at least reached safety before darkness or the threatening storm could overtake them. As they approached the compound's edge, the man came forward to meet them. He wore the simple black clothing of a clergyman, though his collar was absent, replaced by a practical woolen scarf against the cold. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his beard shot through with grey, but his eyes were kind, crinkling at the corners as he smiled in greeting. "Well now," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with the faint accent of the eastern states. "This is an unexpected blessing. 3 young travelers, and on foot in this weather." He looked them over with concern. "You must be exhausted and half-frozen. Come inside where it's warm." Samuel hesitated, suddenly unsure how to begin explaining their presence. "Are you Brother James?" he asked. The man's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "I am. James Thorne, though Brother James is what most call me here." His gaze sharpened with interest. "You've heard of me?" Samuel nodded, reaching into his tunic to retrieve the carved token Helona had given him. "We were sent to find you," from the Cheyenne winter camp in the northern valleys. Brother James accepted the token, turning it over in his hands with evident recognition. "Halona's mark," he murmured, glancing up with new understanding in his eyes. "You've come from Ahanu's band." "Yes," Samuel confirmed, relief washing through him at the priest's immediate comprehension. "We need your help. There's trouble at the camp. Soldiers came looking for us." Brother James's expression sobered. "I see. This is a conversation better had indoors, I think. Come, let's get you warm and fed, and then you can tell me everything." He led them toward the main building, calling out instructions to a woman who appeared in the doorway to prepare hot food, warm blankets, heated bricks for their feet. As they entered the mission house, the blessed warmth of a well-maintained fire enveloped them, bringing stinging tears to Samuel's eyes. The interior was simple but comfortable, wooden floors covered with woven rugs, sturdy furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace, shelves lined with books. It spoke of practicality rather than luxury, of a life devoted to service rather than comfort. The woman Brother James had addressed, introducing her as Mrs. Harper, the mission's housekeeper, clucked sympathetically over their condition, helping them remove snow-crusted outer garments and settling them in chairs pulled close to the fire. Within minutes, they were wrapped in blankets, warm bricks at their feet, mugs of steaming broth in their hands. Only when they had taken the edge off their hunger and cold did Brother James pull up a chair across from them, his expression attentive but patient. "Now then," he said gently, "perhaps you can tell me who you are and what brings you to my door with Halona's token." Samuel took a deep breath and began their story, the death of their parents, their abandonment in Pinewood Creek, their desperate flight into the wilderness and near death in the blizzard. He explained how Ahanu had found them, how the Cheyenne had taken them in despite initial reservations, how they had gradually found a place among the people. Emma added details when Samuel faltered, describing the kindness shown to them by Natuna and the other women, the skills they had learned, the growing sense of belonging they had experienced. Even Timmy contributed, his simple accounts of friendship, with Misu and the other children carrying a poignancy that more elaborate descriptions might have missed. When they reached the arrival of the soldiers and their forced departure from the camp, Brother James's expression grew increasingly grave. He listened without interruption as Samuel described Pajakok's guidance and their subsequent journey to the mission. "And so we're here," Samuel concluded, his voice hoarse from the long recitation. "The soldiers think the Cheyenne kidnapped us, but that's not true. They saved our lives. We need to make the soldiers understand that before anyone gets hurt." Brother James was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful as he absorbed their story. "A remarkable journey," he said finally, "and one that speaks well of both your courage and Ahanu's wisdom." He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "You realize, of course, that many would find your account difficult to believe. The prevailing view is that Indians, Cheyenne included, are incapable of the kind of compassion and acceptance you describe." "But you don't think that?" Emma said, a statement rather than a question. Brother James smiled slightly. "No, I don't. I've lived among the Cheyenne and other tribes for 15 years. I've seen more Christian charity in their camps than in many church congregations," he sighed, rubbing a hand across his beard. "But convincing others of this truth has been the work of my lifetime, with limited success, I'm afraid." "Can you help the Cheyenne?" Samuel pressed, anxiety sharpening his voice. The soldiers were threatening to take everyone to the fort for questioning. Pajakok said that journey could kill the elders and young children. "I will certainly try," Brother James assured him. "I have some modest influence with the military authorities at Fort Collins. Enough, perhaps, to arrange a more measured approach than a forced relocation in winter." "How soon can we go there?" Samuel asked, already mentally preparing for another journey. To the fort, to explain what really happened. Brother James regarded him with a mixture of admiration and concern. Your dedication does you credit, but I think the immediate need is for rest and recovery. You've traveled far in harsh conditions, and the young one especially needs time to regain his strength. He nodded toward Timmy, who had dozed off against Emma's shoulder, the excitement and warmth finally overcoming his determination to stay awake. But the Cheyenne, Samuel began to protest, will benefit more from a measured, well-prepared intervention than from a hasty one. Brother James interrupted gently. I'll send a messenger to Fort Collins first thing tomorrow with a letter explaining the situation and requesting a meeting with the commanding officer. With favorable conditions, we could have a response within 3 days. Samuel wanted to argue further, but recognized the wisdom in the priest's approach. They were exhausted, their resources depleted. Rushing to the fort without proper preparation might do more harm than good to the Cheyenne cause. What about us? Emma asked, giving voice to the question that hovered beneath their immediate concerns. What happens to us now? Brother James's expression softened. For now, you are welcome guests at the mission. We have room in the children's dormitory. There are 7 other orphans currently in our care, most of them younger than you. He paused, considering his next words carefully. As for the longer term, that may depend partly on what transpires with the Cheyenne situation. There are procedures for placing orphaned children, but given the unusual circumstances... He left the thought unfinished, but Samuel understood the implication. Their future remained uncertain, contingent on factors beyond their control. The realization settled heavily in his chest, alongside worry for the Cheyenne and exhaustion from their journey. Mrs. Harper reappeared then, announcing that beds had been prepared and a hot meal was waiting in the dining room. The practical concerns of immediate comfort temporarily displaced larger questions as they followed her from the room, Samuel supporting a sleepy Timmy while Emma gathered their few possessions. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time since their parents' death, Samuel stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the regular breathing of other children in the dormitory. They had reached safety, accomplished the first part of their mission. Brother James seemed trustworthy, genuinely concerned for both them and the Cheyenne. Yet uncertainty gnawed at him. Would the mission priest's influence be sufficient to protect Ahanu and the others? Would the military authorities believe their account of events? And even if immediate danger was averted, what then? Would they ever see the Cheyenne again? Would they be allowed to choose their own path forward? Or would others make that decision for them, as adults always seemed to do? Outside, the threatened storm had finally arrived, wind moaning around the eaves of the mission buildings. Samuel thought of the Cheyenne camp, wondering if the soldiers were still there, if tensions had escalated or eased, if Keme and the other scouts had returned to find unexpected guests among their people. Sleep eluded him for hours, his mind cycling through worries and contingencies until exhaustion finally claimed him, pulling him into dreams filled with snow and soldiers and Ahanu's steady gaze, watching him ride away into uncertainty. 3 days at the mission stretched into a week. Snow continued to fall intermittently, delaying Brother James's messenger and testing Samuel's already strained patience. He spent hours by the window of the dormitory, staring northward as if he could somehow see beyond the horizon to the Cheyenne camp. Emma adapted more readily to their temporary home, helping with the younger orphans and assisting Mrs. Harper in the kitchen. Her practical nature found comfort in useful work while they waited. Timmy quickly made friends with the other children, his resilience allowing him to find joy in simple games despite the uncertainty that hung over their future. Brother James kept them informed of his efforts, explaining each step he took to secure help for the Cheyenne. his letter to Fort Collins, had been dispatched despite the weather, carried by a mixed-blood scout named Joseph, who knew the territory intimately. A second message had been sent to the territorial governor, outlining the situation and emphasizing the humanitarian considerations. "It's important to approach this carefully," he explained to Samuel one evening, sensing the boy's frustration. "With the delays, the military sees the world in terms of threats and security. We need to help them understand this situation differently." Samuel nodded, though inwardly he chafed at the deliberate pace of adult negotiations when lives might hang in the balance. But what if the soldiers have already taken action against the camp? What if they've moved everyone to the fort? Brother James sighed, his weathered face showing the weight of similar concerns. "Then we will address that situation when we confirm it. But rushing northward in this weather without proper authority or preparation would help no one." On the 8th day, as weak winter sunlight struggled through cloudy skies, the lookout called that riders were approaching from the east. Samuel rushed to the mission house, hope and anxiety warring in his chest. Brother James was already on the porch, shading his eyes against the glare of sun on snow. "Military," he confirmed as Samuel joined him. "3 riders, including an officer." And he squinted, then smiled slightly. "Joseph is with them. A messenger made it through." The riders approached at a steady pace, their blue uniforms stark against the white landscape. Samuel recognized the military bearing instantly, reminded of the soldiers who had searched the Cheyenne camp. His hand unconsciously moved to touch the small medicine pouch Helona had given him, still worn beneath his shirt, despite the mission's more conventional clothing. Brother James stepped forward as the party reached the mission grounds, offering a greeting that was formal but warm. The lead officer, a captain by his insignia, dismounted stiffly, his face ruddy from cold and his expression guarded. "Brother James," he acknowledged, "your message was this unexpected. I'm Captain Thomas Hardin, Fort Collins. These are Lieutenant Walsh and your own messenger, who insisted on guiding us personally." Joseph, a lean man with features that spoke of both native and white ancestry, caught Samuel's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Something in the gesture conveyed reassurance, though Samuel couldn't have explained why. "Thank you for coming so promptly, Captain," Brother James replied. "Please, come inside where we can speak comfortably. The children are eager to meet you." The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. These would be the Hayes orphans, the ones reportedly abducted by Cheyenne. "The same," Brother James confirmed, "though you'll find their account of events differs significantly from whatever reports reached Fort Collins." Inside the mission house, Emma and Timmy were waiting, their faces solemn but composed. Samuel took his place beside them, forming a united front as the military officer regarded them with open curiosity. "Well," Captain Hardin said after a moment, "you appear healthy enough. Were you indeed held at a Cheyenne camp north of here?" Samuel stepped forward slightly, conscious of representing not just himself, but the people who had saved them. "We weren't held, sir. We were rescued. There's a difference." The captain's expression suggested skepticism, but he gestured for Samuel to continue. For the second time in a week, Samuel recounted their story. Their parents' deaths, Pinewood, Greek's indifference, their desperate flight into the wilderness, and Ahanu's timely intervention. This time, however, he focused particularly on the respect and care they had received among the Cheyenne, emphasizing that at no point had they been treated as captives. Emma added her perspective, describing the skills she had learned from the Cheyenne women and the kindness shown to them despite initial wariness. Even Timmy contributed, his simple declaration that "Misu is my best friend," carrying a poignancy that more sophisticated arguments might have lacked. Throughout their account, Captain Harden listened with professional detachment, occasionally making notes in a small book he produced from his uniform pocket. When they finished, he sat back, studying them with a measuring gaze. "An extraordinary tale," he said finally, "and not at all consistent with the reports that reached us from Pinewood Creek." "What did they tell you?" Samuel asked, unable to contain his curiosity about how their former community had characterized their disappearance. The captain consulted his notebook. A Sheriff Wilson reported that 3 orphaned children had likely been abducted by marauding Indians after attempts to place them with proper guardians. He described signs of struggle at your cabin and tracks leading toward known Cheyenne hunting grounds. "That's a lie," Emma exclaimed, her usual composure cracking. "The sheriff barely looked for us when we went missing. He never even came to our cabin like he promised." Captain Harden regarded her thoughtfully. "People often reshape facts to absolve themselves of responsibility, young lady, particularly when children's welfare is concerned." He turned back to Samuel. "Continue your account. You say you left the Cheyenne camp voluntarily when my men arrived." Samuel explained the circumstances of their departure, Ahanu's concern for their safety, Pajakok's guidance through the storm, their journey to the mission to seek Brother James's help. "And these Cheyenne made no attempt to prevent your leaving? To hide you permanently from white authorities?" "They hid us temporarily," Samuel corrected, "because your men approached with weapons drawn and accusations ready. Ahanu knew you wouldn't believe the truth if they just presented us to you." Captain Harden's mouth tightened, but he didn't dispute the assessment. "A reasonable precaution, perhaps, given the circumstances." He turned to Brother James. "You've had these children in your care for a week now. What is your evaluation of their account?" Brother James didn't hesitate. "I believe every word. It aligns with what I know of Ahanu and his band. They are among the most peaceful and honorable Cheyenne I've encountered in 15 years of missionary work. That they would save 3 white children from certain death, then care for them through winter, is entirely in keeping with their character." The captain nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And what became of the soldiers sent to investigate the Cheyenne camp? Have you had any report?" "Nothing definitive," Brother James admitted. "My contacts suggest they returned to Fort Collins several days ago, but I've received no official communication regarding their findings or actions." Lieutenant Walsh, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, leaned forward. "Sir, Lieutenant Reynolds led that patrol. He reported finding evidence of white children in the camp, but no actual sighting. The Cheyenne claimed the children had left before the patrol arrived, heading south toward settlements." "Which was the truth," Samuel pointed out. "So it seems," Captain Harden acknowledged. He closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "Very well. I believe I have enough information to file a corrected report regarding this matter. The Hayes orphans were not abducted but rescued by Cheyenne, who provided humanitarian aid during extreme winter conditions and facilitated their return to white society when appropriate." Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, though concern for the Cheyenne remained. "What about Ahanu and the others? Are they safe? Will there be any punishment for helping us?" Captain Harden looked mildly offended at the suggestion. "The United States Army does not punish acts of humanity, young man. Quite the contrary. I intend to commend this Ahanu for his assistance to American citizens in distress." His expression softened slightly. "There's been enough misunderstanding between whites and natives without adding this incident to the tally." Brother James smiled approvingly. "A refreshing perspective, Captain. I wonder if I might suggest a further step. These children have formed significant bonds with their Cheyenne rescuers. Perhaps they might be permitted to visit the camp under appropriate escort to express their gratitude in person." The captain hesitated, clearly weighing military protocol against humanitarian considerations. "I suppose that could be arranged," assuming weather permits and the camp hasn't moved on to spring hunting grounds. He glanced at the Hayes children, noting their hopeful expressions. It would provide closure, if nothing else. "And what happens to us after that?" Emma asked, giving voice to the question that had hovered at the edges of their minds since arriving at the mission. "Will we be sent to an orphanage?" Captain Hardin deferred to Brother James, who cleared his throat somewhat awkwardly. "That's traditionally what would happen in cases like yours, however." He hesitated, then continued more confidently. "Given your unique circumstances and the bonds you've formed, I wonder if a more unconventional arrangement might be considered." "What kind of arrangement?" Samuel asked, tension creeping back into his posture. Brother James smiled reassuringly. "Nothing has been decided yet, but I've been corresponding with the territorial governor about establishing a more permanent cross-cultural exchange program between the mission and cooperative tribes like Ahanu's band. If such a program were approved, it might include provisions for continued contact between orphaned children and native families who have formed bonds of kinship. Hope flared in Samuel's chest, sudden, almost painful in its intensity. We might be able to stay connected to the Cheyenne, maybe even live with them sometimes. And no, it would be unprecedented, Captain Hardin warned, though his tone wasn't entirely dismissive. There would be conditions, oversight, regular reports to territorial authorities. But possible, Brother James insisted, with the right advocates and evidence that such an arrangement serves the children's best interests. He smiled at the captain. "Perhaps your report on this situation could help establish that foundation?" 2 weeks later, Samuel stood at the edge of the Cheyenne winter camp, emotion tightening his throat as familiar faces emerged from lodges to greet their small party. Brother James, Captain Hardin, and the Hayes children had made the journey north as soon as weather permitted, bringing gifts and formal commendations from the territorial government. Ahanu was the first to approach, his dignified bearing unchanged, though new lines of worry had etched themselves around his eyes. He stopped before Samuel, studying him silently for a long moment, before placing both hands on the boy's shoulders, in a gesture of profound connection. "You have returned," he said simply, "as the spirits whispered you would." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Behind Ahanu, the entire camp had gathered, Nituna with tears glistening. In her eyes, Kem standing tall and proud, Halona leaning on her walking stick with a knowing smile. And at the front of the crowd, barely contained by his mother's restraining hand, Misu vibrated with excitement until Timmy broke away from Emma's side and ran to his friend with a cry of pure joy. The reunion that followed was a blur of embraces, explanations, and introductions as Captain Hardin and Brother James were welcomed into the camp with cautious courtesy. Samuel found himself constantly surrounded by warriors who clapped his shoulder and spoke of hunts to come, by women who examined his face critically and declared he had grown too thin, by children who tugged at his hands and clothes in excitement. Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded and the camp settled into celebration, Samuel found a moment of quiet with Ahanu near the central fire. The Cheyenne leader listened intently as Samuel described Brother James's proposal for continued connection between the orphans and the tribe. "The spirit spoke truly," Ahanu said when Samuel finished. "Halona saw purpose in your coming to us, though none could have foreseen this path." "Is it a good path?" Samuel asked, still uncertain despite the joy of reunion. "Trying to live in both worlds?" Ahanu gazed into the fire, considering the question with characteristic thoroughness. "It is not an easy path," he acknowledged. "Few have walked it successfully, but you and your siblings have already proven stronger than most." He looked up, meeting Samuel's eyes directly. "And you would not walk it alone." the simple promise, carried weight that formal documents and official arrangements could not match. In that moment, Samuel understood that whatever challenges lay ahead, negotiating between cultures, establishing precedents where none existed, growing up with feet in two different worlds, the foundation had been laid for something new and precious. Across the fire, Emma sat with Nituna and the other women, her hands moving confidently through the motions of quill work as if she had never left. Nearby, Timmy and Missu rolled in the snow with the other children, their laughter bright in the winter air. And here beside him sat Ahanu, who had once been a stranger from an alien culture, but now represented family as surely as the siblings who shared his blood. The winter that had taken so much from them, parents, home, security, had ultimately given something rare in return. A family expanded beyond traditional boundaries, a sense of belonging that transcended difference, and a future that promised to honor both their past and their remarkable journey toward an unexpected home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.